Well, hello everybody, and welcome to WordCast number 76. Once again, very proud of myself for getting that correct again. But we've got a pretty big week this time, actually. There's a lot of stuff. I know we actually did miss last week, and there was just stuff came up. Don't worry, that's not a consistent theme. Just things got a little bit crazy. And we also wanted to be able to include some of the WWDC news and stuff like that, so it ended up just making more sense to do it a week later. So here we are. We're back with lots of interesting news for you guys. And one thing I want to mention here at the very beginning is our security news segment is actually going to be moved to a separate video from here on out instead of being in the main podcast. Just because I think that's something that's less. We think that's something less conversational, and so I'm gonna shell that out as its own thing. So
Yeah, we discussed that earlier, and it just seems like it ends up being something where it's mostly just you talking, and me kind of just sitting there listening. And I just think that
yeah,
overall it can be better formatted for the people that really care about that stuff, as its
I
own
think so too.
thing, and then you don't have to stare at my beautiful face for 20 minutes.
I mean, what if we want to?
Then you can watch the rest of this podcast.
What if we want to?
That's what the rest of the podcast is
What
for.
if we want
Oh my
to?
gosh.
So yeah, we've got WWDC kind of coming up here in the frontliner here, and you know what? I know this channel, our channel, is focused a lot on servers and PC, but there's I think Apple News is still something important to cover, and there was a lot of interesting things. So
And some of
we're gonna
this
go ahead
is
and
going to have less so with the initial topics of the iPhone and iPad related software, but more so with
yeah,
the second section about the Mac. I do think that's going to have long term some effects on the PC market, and so we'll have to talk about
I
that as
think so
well.
too.
Um,
Absolutely, yeah. Plus, I'm sure there's gonna be some banter in this
oh yeah.
in the iOS section.
But yeah, so let's jump right into it. So they announced both iOS 14 and iPad OS 14. This is a pretty big change, especially on the iOS side. But the way that we'll break this down, I want to talk about the features that are coming to both, and then we'll talk about the specifics of iPhone and then the specifics of iPad. Now we're not going to.
And I think it's pretty big for both. It really is pretty big for both. It's just
Yeah, but
it's
we'll get into it. But there's some things that are by nature of how different products work a little bit different on each. We'll get into
yeah.
it, but to start with the features that are found on both, and again, we're only going over what I feel like are some of the more important features. Like there's, the Maps app is updated, for example. The Photos app is updated on all of them, but that's not really
Yeah.
that big of a deal in the grand scheme. Like nobody uses Apple Maps.
There's so many little
Yeah.
things. It's like it would just be impossible to cover
So
it
we
all.
mostly want to talk about the stuff that we find more interesting. So the first thing is Siri is getting some pretty big changes. For one, and this is the more talked about one, even though I think it's actually the least important of the two big changes. Siri is a lot less visually intrusive now. So rather than
Yeah.
taking you to your own or like its own screen, which is what Siri has traditionally done since it launched, it will instead bring up like the Siri, like a little bubble down at the bottom of the screen. And once you ask it its question, it will give you the information in a small window that's more akin to a notification. So if you ask it for the weather, if you ask it something IoT related or for some other information or to add to a list, it just gives you a little notification. You cannot interact with the content that is under Siri while you are using it.
And that bothers me for iPad specifically, actually.
Yeah,
That is
so
not I don't have a problem with that for the phone.
yeah. So
Um
if you guys have not yet watched it, Marquez Brownlee interviewed Craig, who is the senior vice president of software development, I believe it is, at Apple. And they talked about this. And he said that, Craig said that this was a very deliberate decision. So they actually built out both versions, both a version of Siri where you can interact with the content underneath and a version of Siri where you can't. And the reason that they decided to go with the version where you can't interact with the content underneath is because for most interactions, you get the information and then you want to move on. And so if you can
yeah.
interact with the content underneath, then that means that you have to specifically go up and deliberately swipe away Siri, or you have to wait for it to time out, and then they'd have to figure out how long they want that to be. Whereas, for in most cases, you just can, with the current build, just tap anywhere on the screen to get it to go away and go back to what you're doing. And so
Yeah, and
they,
I can understand like it getting intrusive, especially on smaller screen
yeah,
devices. So I actually like the move for smaller screens, but I personally still think having it like in the corner or something on iPad where it can be persistent, you can have it do commands while you're working would be really useful.
yeah. And so that was something that they had talked about in the interview with Craig, and he was actually open to that feedback because they already have both versions built. So it's really just a
Yeah,
toggle internally. And so
and it's so cool to see them listening to feedback like that. Like he seemed genuinely fine and interested
this,
in feedback. That is not
it's not
Apple,
just
you
not
know?
Apple. When has Google ever done that?
Yeah, when has anybody ever done that? And especially somebody so high up in the
Yeah.
company done anything more? This isn't like like sure MKBHD has interviewed Elon and stuff like that, but this was not a like I want to interview you because you're successful. This was a I want to talk to you about some criticisms and stuff of your OS
Hmm.
and give feedback. When he talks to Elon, he's not giving feedback on the Tesla. He's talking about
Yeah.
Elon. This was a very much so about the product.
Yeah, and one of the nice things too about this interview was when they were discussing, because Marquez brought up the same thing of how that does make more sense on iPhone than it does on iPad. And Craig's response to him was, "How would you want that to work on iPad, specifically in dismissal of the notification?" So obviously, if you can interact with it underneath it, you have to manually dismiss it. And he was saying, "Do you want that to be something that times out? Do you want that to be something you just have to swipe away?" And so he kind of took that feedback to heart and said, they would talk about that internally.
Yeah.
And then they're going to use the dev preview and the beta time to get more feedback on that, especially once public beta comes out and they can get a lot more people trying it. Um, and they can kind of go from there. And again, because it's already built out, it's much easier for Apple to just say, okay, by launch, we'll just switch it if people like it that way more. And they
Yeah,
can,
I mean, we've got a lot of time until
yeah,
launch,
because
so
realistically, this probably won't come
it's
out until
yeah,
September.
yeah. And I mean, I'm gonna grab the beta as soon as I
Oh, yeah.
can, but
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, in the history I have with iPad OS betas has been minimal
Mhm.
bugs. There was one time I had something major. I don't remember what it was. There was something that kept crashing, but generally it's pretty stable. So like, I'm happy to try it out right away. And anyway, I just think it's impressive that they're taking this kind of feedback. And like, I think for iPad, it would make a lot of sense to have it persistent
Mhm.
potentially, so that you can be typing and working on something, and you can have Siri there, like actually taking commands from you consistently to do things, do actions that take more time with the screen.
Yeah.
And then you're starting to get into this interesting multitasking on an iPad, right? Where you could have a picture-in-picture video playing while you're typing up a document, as well as asking Siri to reply to messages.
Yeah.
Like that could be really
Yeah,
useful.
and then in addition to that, I mean, even if you just look at just the basic examples that Apple used, like one of the examples they used was adding things to a shopping list from um, a recipe that you're looking at. Well, it'd be very nice to be able to scroll through. Let's say you're on a page with multiple recipes, or you're on a page with a pretty long recipe, or something like that. It'd be nice to be able to scroll through and just kind of more naturally read through the recipe as you're doing it, and continually add
Okay.
stuff to it rather than having
Yeah.
to
Yes.
scroll, say, launch Siri again to add to it, have it do the animation, come up, and then you close it.
That seems less
Yeah,
convenient. Yeah, having to do that repetitively like that would annoy me significantly. So, and again, I mean, on iPhone, I think it makes sense because on iPhone, I'm not trying to type up a document for doing a video or something, right? But like when you're on the go and you're trying to take notes, or you're trying to work on something, like you can do real work on the iPad, and I still feel like phones, they're just too small. You can't do most real work on them, right? They're for quick notes, quick things, calendars, but not real
yeah,
work.
especially since you can type on the iPad. I mean, you can obviously do this on the
Yeah.
iPhone, but since it's a more common use case to be typing on the iPad from an external device, where Siri is,
Mm-hmm.
if you're doing Siri on the iPhone, the like bubble for Siri at the bottom still covers up where your keyboard would be visually.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
if you're typing from the Magic Keyboard or the Folio keyboard or any other keyboard, which is clearly how Apple wants some people to use the iPad, then it
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to lose all interactivity with something over something that's just a visual on the bottom corner of the screen.
Right,
So
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so I think, yeah, I agree there. And I mean, they could even put it in the top corner. I don't know. They could potentially put Siri in the notification pane. That's something that we've seen some Android devices do, and do that. For which is something we don't see a lot of in iOS is like persistent notifications. But other than obviously media playback and stuff is something that already exists. But having it up there could potentially work on iPhone to not interrupt things. But the other concern that you start to run into is then you forget that it's on, and on something that has a smaller battery, it's potentially a breach of privacy if it's listening to you and you don't want it to be because you forgot about it, that kind
yeah,
of
I don't
stuff.
think they would ever do that, but I do think that I
Yeah.
mean already like most iPad apps don't put a ton of info in the bottom right corner of the screen. And so I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
it's already out of the way enough that they should just let it be interactable.
Agreed. And I think the
Or
only.
and I don't think they should do this on I mean I do think they should do this, but I don't think they will do this on iPhone, but I think it's more
Mhm.
likely on iPad. Make a toggle in the settings.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be really cool too. And they could even have a feature where it dynamically changes, which is something that Apple's always a fan of. And this is just one example, but there could be a lot of reasons for it, right? But like certain apps are open, maybe,
I
then it stays
I
persistent.
don't think even Apple
But
would want that. Something else that we'll
well,
talk about later in this is defaults, but they kind of talked about the idea
yeah,
of in that interview of not wanting apps to have kind of the ability to do malicious control over OS stuff. And I think that you would run
hmm,
into the issue of, let's say you have an app that, let's say, has a Siri shortcut, and then that app, when open, can on its own decide to, or use an API to trigger Siri being open more. So if you launch Siri while that
yeah,
app is open, it can have its own shortcut that kind of uses that to gather more information or something like that. There are ways that that could be, if it's controlled by the app developer, it could be a new attack vector, and it doesn't actually simplify things for users. It makes it more complicated because people don't know what apps
hmm.
are going to do what.
So I agree. And actually, the better example that I wanted to use was potentially have it so that it changes whether or not it's persistent, dependent on whether or not you're using a external keyboard or
Mm-hmm.
not. So then it's not wasting screen space if you are using the built-in, touchscreen keyboard instead.
Yeah.
Possibly, but I don't know. I mean, my experience of typing on the iPad, obviously touchscreen typing is not ideal unless you're doing like split thumb, and then they could just put it in the middle anyway. So I would just like to see an option for it to be persistent on iPad, though, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think it should just be a toggle.
I agree. Yeah, I
So,
think I think that's probably the simplest way to do it.
and then the other big update to Siri is that they have improved the ability for it to answer questions in a way that's more similar to Google Assistant, because they have built their own kind of like I version of like the knowledge graph from Google, which for those that don't know what that is, the way that Google Assistant works and the way that Google Search works, where it shows you results from web page, is their knowledge graph. And so essentially, Google has built in the ability for their backend tools to read and like parse through web pages and pull pertinent information based on your search. And
Well, and to be clear, that's actually something that the web developers can push out themselves as well to be to kind of opt in for that.
yeah, but
And so like
but
yeah,
like that is the idea of like why Google Assistant is able to get that information in the first place, is that they
yeah,
have that in place. And so Apple is doing that on their end as well now, where they can pull information from websites so that they can more accurately and more helpfully answer questions. Whereas right now, if you
yeah.
ask any question that they haven't essentially coded in, it then just kind of says go to this website for the information. Whereas presumably with iOS 14, I haven't gotten to mess with it that much, but from my understanding, it should um, just be able to get that information from the website and read it to you like you would expect a digital assistant to do.
Yeah, and that would be really nice. Siri has had some, not it has been not so great when it comes to that kind of stuff. And I would really like to see that as
Yeah,
well.
and I think that
So,
between shortcuts from iOS 13 and this, it solves really the two biggest issues with Siri. Because Siri
yeah,
did a bad job at tying in with apps. That's solved now through shortcuts. Apps have the ability to uh, like prompt you to for you to confirm you want to add shortcuts to Siri. You can manually make shortcuts. You can do a lot with Siri through shortcuts now. But it was still
yeah.
just bad at answering questions, and this should solve that. And so, while it's not getting the hype and pizzazz that I think Apple could have given it if they would have done both at the same time, I think
Hmm.
if they would have come out with the Siri visual update as its own thing, and then come out with new answer system and a new shortcut system as like a we are revamping Siri, it would have been a little more hyped up. Whereas now all everyone's really talking about is the visual design. Even though I feel like
Yeah,
this is more important as far as making it a good product. Like
it's
realistically,
like actual
yeah,
functionality. Yeah,
realistically, my issue
yeah.
with using Siri or not was never whether or not it covered my screen. It was that it wasn't useful.
Yeah, you're right, right. No, and I entirely, I obviously I don't use Siri a ton because I don't have an iPhone. I use it on my iPad, but it definitely like feels lacking compared to Google
Yeah.
Assistant, and I would like to see some more competition in that
Mhm.
realm. So I think it's really a benefit that they're doing this, and I hope that they're able to do as good of a job with it as Google has, or at least similar.
Yeah. And then the next feature, this actually is kind of similar to the less intrusive Siri, something that people have been requesting for a very long time on iPhone. Incoming calls no longer take up the entire screen. That's
Very
the
nice.
feature. That's probably like
Android's had that for so
yeah,
long.
it's one of those like extremely requested features that it was just like for whatever reason Apple decided not to do.
Yeah, yeah.
And now they're just
And
doing it.
it's like, yeah, yeah. And I feel like there's gonna be that, and you guys will see more of this soon, but there's gonna be that recurring theme of like some of the bigger things that people like about Android are being pulled over here. And it's like, I think enough for some people to be like, okay, now maybe it's worth a consideration. Like it's a consideration, was a consideration for me to potentially actually try like using iOS as my primary device again. Um, and that's, that's something that I haven't really felt in a long time is any compelling
Mhm.
want to do that.
Yeah.
And so these changes as we go through here, you will hear me mocking the fact that Android's had it, but like there's no downside to adding a feature that is great and something else has had for a long
Yeah.
time.
And then the next thing that I wanted to talk about, so voice dictation is now completely handled on device. They already did most voice
Yeah.
dictation on device on iOS 13,
Right.
but they have improved their voices to text models so much that it is now completely on device. And this includes translation. So Apple has a new translation app that's coming as part of iOS and iPadOS 14, and it can do translation. It doesn't have anywhere near as many languages as something like Google Translate, but it does
Yeah.
all of the translation on device. You don't even need an internet connection at all. And then in addition to that, it can. It's not just a one-way thing, so it's not like if you wanted to do English to Spanish, it's not just English to Spanish, and then if you want to flip it, you have to then press a button to flip it.
Right. It
You
can do back and
select two
forth, right?
languages, and it's just ready to go with both languages to translate them back and forth. And so,
And that's really
yeah,
awesome.
if
Yeah.
you're, let's say you travel to, I'll use Mexico since I was just using Spanish as an example. If you travel from the U.S. to Mexico and you don't speak Spanish, well, you can just have that app and just place your phone down, speak, it'll translate it, and then they can speak and it'll translate it to you. Um,
Yeah. That's really
yeah,
cool.
and so it's just very helpful, and it's so nice that that is run on device. They don't have to send data to the cloud, both for privacy, but also because like a lot of carriers still charge a lot for international data, and so not having to pay for that is great.
And I think that right there is actually the bigger thing for me. I mean, obviously I'm a privacy focused person, but I,
Yeah.
like, I think the bigger thing is just the ability to do this without an internet connection, and the dictation on top of that, right? Because especially for people that use dictation like a lot, that are potentially using it because of a disability
Hmm.
or something, having that not work because your internet's down
Yeah.
is shitty.
Yeah. And there's some
And
other
so making that better is
Yeah,
important.
and there's some other accessibility features in here we'll talk about, and there's a lot more that we won't talk about, but Apple's been doing a lot that's actually going to be really helpful for a number of different accessibility needs.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And I'm glad that they
yeah,
are. They're still the platform I'd recommend for anybody that has, accessibility needs.
yeah. And then the next big change that's coming for this is actually iPhone, iPad, and macOS because iMessage is on all of them. But there are some changes to iMessage. The smaller but very helpful change is that you can now pin messaging threads to the top. And what I really like about how they're doing this is it's not pinning the actual preview of the thread. Rather, it's just pinning their picture, and it'll give you like an icon if you have a notification from them. And so
That's
you can
nice.
have a lot, you can have, I think, like 9 people pinned up top above all of your messaging threads. And it can be people or group chats. Um,
Right.
and then what's cool is if they're messaging you from an iPhone, um, via iMessage or any iMessage device, I guess, um, it will actually show you the typing indicator from just the Messages app. You don't actually have to go into their message if they're typing a response, and it will
That is
show
really
a small
nice. Yeah.
preview of the message over their picture if they send you a message while you're on that page.
That's nice. That's nice. iMessage is still the better messaging platform. It's
Hmm.
true, and they're continually adding more functionality to it. It seems almost like they are adding more stuff in part because they see Google kind of coming up on the horizon with RCS of finally, something semi-competitive to iMessage,
Yeah, and
and
what I
yeah,
fully expect, and with the next two things that we'll talk about are specifically with the actual messaging aspect rather than just like a visual thing within the app. Um,
yeah,
but at some point, Apple is. I would be very surprised if they just never implemented RCS. It'd be very stupid, I think, because eventually carriers are going to want to move away from SMS if RCS is good. Um,
agreed. And I think the eventual global goal is just no more SMS. SMS is
yeah,
terrible. Like let's just move away from
Yeah,
it.
and so with that, I think that what Apple wants to do is try and keep iMessage feature-wise uh, ahead of RCS, and I think that's the way they
Yeah,
do it.
yeah,
So RCS is pretty similar to what iMessage has been for a while. There's still some things iMessage does that RCS doesn't, but it's much
yep,
closer than SMS. However,
yeah, yeah,
with this new version of iMessage, they're adding some enhancements for group messaging that RCS doesn't have. So for one, you can get mentions within it, which there have been other apps that do this. Allo did it, for example, when we had tried that. You could tag specific people.
yeah,
Um,
yep,
so you can tag people within group chats, and you can make it so that if you only want to be notified from the group chat when you're tagged, you can do that, which is very nice because group
hmm,
chats are obviously very chaotic sometimes. But the other, and in my opinion, the bigger upgrade for group chats is that they're adding inline replies. So to kind of explain this, if you don't have context, I mean, you guys will know this from like social media. It's kind of like social media comments. And so the way that this works is, you can send a message to your group chat about something. Let's say you're making plans to go camping. You could have a message about the supplies and a message about the location and a message about the date and time you guys want to do it. And you can reply specifically to each of those messages. And rather than it cluttering up the entire thread, it kind of ties it to that message as a direct, smaller reply to that.
yeah, right, right. And I I feel like Apple has to do quite a bit to try and stay ahead of RCS as well. And the reason I'm saying that is because I feel like as RCS slowly becomes more widely adopted of being the default on all Android devices, I think it is going to be easier for Google to make updates to it because it's not a protocol that they can just not touch, right? And so it's kind of good to see competition in this area. I feel like it's an area that's going to
So
drive
I
competition for a
don't
long
think
time.
it's going to be that easy for Google to add certain features, because the thing about RCS is that since it's a universal standard, apps are built differently. Google can't add, for example, inline message replies on
Right,
their
that's true.
own.
Yeah.
They can add the feature, but how long is it going to take for that feature to be widespread? And the issue is that
I
until
think
that,
that just depends. I don't know how the update path is for RCS. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
but I mean, like something like inline messages requires visual changes. There's no way that
Hmm.
every app is being built with Google having full control over the visual aspects of messages within their apps.
Yeah, and actually to top that off too, Google has to be careful because we want RCS to be something that is a global
Mhm.
standard, and if it's a global standard, then this stuff would have to be things that iPhone would have to start supporting too. We don't want we don't want features of RCS to be Android exclusive. Like the vision I have, and I think a lot of people have for RCS, is a proper, complete cross-platform, complete compatibility thing where you don't have differences depending on your
Yeah.
device. And that would be a benefit to communication as a whole,
Mhm.
is the ability to communicate with any platform. And I mean potentially even going as far, right, as like weird OSs like Lineage and Sailfish, or if Windows Phone comes back or whatever. And so yeah, I think you're actually probably
Yeah.
right
I
there.
just
Whereas Apple can very easily make changes like
Yeah,
this.
I just don't see, with what I've heard and seen about how the RCS standard is kind of set up and communicated, I just don't see it being something that's easily updatable. It feels
Yeah.
more like it's going to be, probably much more frequently than SMS, because it
Yeah,
presumably
yeah,
is
but it'd
updatable,
probably be still
but it's
like,
a every few years at best thing.
yeah,
And even
or
then,
even potentially every year, but it can't be as big of an update.
well,
Right? It has to be something that
it
like,
has to be a big enough change, I feel like, for them to get all OEMs on board. And the issue is that
yeah, yeah,
because Android is so terrible with software updates, it's going to be one of those things where any new feature will likely only come to the phones that have been out for a year or two. And
yeah,
the big issue with updating RCS in general, even getting it adopted is already a mess.
yeah,
But eventually that'll happen, and it's one of those things where a lot of the features that we're seeing of RCS, the faster communication, the better images, the notification that someone is typing, those types of things are not really that big of a deal for you to just not have if you message somebody else. But inline replies, for example, are. Mentions are. If you add
yeah.
those and they don't work because one person doesn't have it, you need some kind of visual indicator. iMessage has that by the green bubbles and the blue bubbles, is that anyone on iMessage is, iPhone gets the updates, and most people update fast enough that a month after iOS comes out, most people will have these new features.
This is true.
Whereas
Yeah,
two
yeah.
years after an Android update comes out, yeah, most
I,
Pixels will
I,
have
well,
it,
I
but
think,
most Samsung phones won't.
yeah. Well, and I think what it is that, yeah, it comes down to whether or not it's a protocol backend update or a visual messages
Yeah.
upgrade, right?
So like,
If there's like a security thing they
uh,
can do on just RCS itself, that could be potentially be globally, done just working with the carriers to make sure the carrier's tech supports it and not have to touch the device necessarily. But then, having to do, visual upgrades, I think you're
yeah.
right there, is that's something that is hard to do. And even if they can just push it through the app store with messages, right?
Mhm.
Like if it's something that requires a new version of Android, then who's going to
Yeah,
use it,
but
who's going to
and
not.
again, like even with it being something that they can push an update through with messages, that only helps the people that use messages, which is not most Android
Yes.
users. Um,
Although it is becoming most, I will say, since switching to messages and using RCS, I am surprised by the number of people I know that are on Android. So factoring out the people I know that are on iOS, but just the people that are using Android, it's probably
well,
about 85-90% of the people I
a
communicate
lot of
with.
Samsung phones, the built-in Samsung app supports RCS, especially on T-Mobile. Um,
It doesn't through the Google Messages app, though, as far as I understand.
I'm pretty sure it does.
Like, so sorry, I should rephrase. I think it does on T-Mobile
Yeah.
Google Messages to the Samsung app, but not between carriers, whereas Messages can currently function between
Mhm.
carriers. Now, I think some of the newer Samsung devices are being shipped with the stock Google Messages app. It's something they're trying to force. I think. I could be wrong, but
Yeah. And I mean, like that'll work for some carriers, but like Verizon, for example, likes to try and force down, their messaging app down people's throats.
oh, they
Um,
absolutely do, and they've had essentially their own version of RCS for about 3 years now. But it sucks, in my opinion.
yeah,
Like it needs to be carrier agnostic for
yeah.
sure.
I do think it'll eventually get better, and like again, there will be some things that they can push through more easily. Like for example, if they ever wanted to increase the amount of data that can be sent, so even larger photos or even larger videos, higher res video,
Hmm.
that's something that they can just push through, and then if your app supports it, you get it. If not, it can downgrade it on the network end or something. Um, those
Yeah,
types of things are much easier to do than something like inline replies. So it's going to be very feature
yeah.
specific.
Which, by the way, by default, RCS supports 100 megabyte
Yeah,
delivery, so that's pretty cool. Like there's no photo big
yeah.
enough really that you could take on
Videos
any
mostly is
phone
what
that
I'm
wouldn't
getting
send,
at.
but
Yeah,
video is the only. Yeah, yeah.
like it'd be very nice to eventually just be able to text someone a full 4K video.
Oh, that'd be so
Yeah,
nice. Yeah, and that's the other thing is having stuff that's having high end messaging functionality that's tied to a phone number is a big deal as
hmm
well. And by the way, I was able to correct myself here. The S20 Ultra, I'm looking at screenshots of its home screen, and the app is definitely not messages
yeah,
from Google. It's definitely their own. However, I know people that have the S20 Ultra, and it does default to RCS. T-Mobile, people that are on T-Mobile, it defaults to
yeah.
RCS,
No,
so that's
I
kind of
like I
nice.
know Samsung's apps on T-Mobile have defaulted to RCS for a while. The
Yes,
issue is
yes.
just like if they want to make some kind of bigger change to RCS, getting Samsung to update their app, and that only applying to phones that came out in the last year and a half is going to kind of be shitty.
That's
So
going to be really shitty, yeah. And I mean, I don't know. RCS is still in a bit of a limbo state. Google needs to push harder, I think, and they've started to. Because like I don't even fully understand if it works, cross carrier. I know T-Mobile supports cross carrier RCS, but do the other carriers, and to what extent? And then, obviously with T-Mobile, it's really simple. Like anybody on T-Mobile that's using the Samsung messaging app or the Google messaging app that has RCS enabled, which it is by default, uses RCS across T-Mobile. That's period. And we just need the other carriers to really properly get on board
yeah.
with it.
So the
Yeah.
next big thing that's on all of them is some changes to privacy updates. So for one, and this is really nice because there's a lot of concerns about apps like accessing cameras or microphones and like recording people when they're not paying attention. People always are concerned, like with Facebook, for example, how their ads can be very creepy and that it's something that you've talked about but not like looked up, and they can still advertise to you.
And it happens too much where it's like it just doesn't seem possible that there's that it's not that.
Yeah, it's very, very weird. Well, with iOS 14, they have an indicator now that automatically comes up. There is no way around it from an app development standpoint that we know of, where it just automatically comes up on your screen up in the top, with a yellow icon if the microphone is active and a green icon if the camera is active. And
And that's really
it comes
nice.
up as soon as the camera activates. For example, one of the things that they used as an example in a video that I had watched was they used I think it was Instagram, where you can swipe over to the side to pull up the camera, and as
Yeah.
soon as you like swiped over enough that Instagram was triggering the camera, the icon came up. And so they know that that
Okay.
was working as intended right away. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. There's no
yeah,
delay.
so that's very nice.
Um.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that I'm glad they've added this because Android's actually had this for a while. If you've had an updated version of Android, any app other than the camera app, if it's using your camera or your microphone, it shows a notification at the top of your screen that that's
Yeah.
happening.
Um,
And I think it's
Yeah,
important.
it's very important. And then the next thing that they changed was they're changing how permissions for photos works. So right now, the way it works is what you would expect of you grant the app permission to view your photos or not. That's
Yeah.
pretty much it. What they are doing is they are changing it so that you have a full photos access or a limited access in which you can select which photos it has access to, whether you select specific
Like
folders, or
folders.
you just I believe you can even just like hit OK, select the photos you want to give it, and it only gives it that. as well.
That's really nice. Permissions is an incredibly important thing, and I feel like Android's been pretty good about that in recent times. I think Windows could maybe have a little bit of work done
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Just really complex permissions is important, and that's
And
something
making
that
them very
um,
upfront and like prompting people in a good way that's like clear and concise is very important. And
yes,
you don't
and
need
that's what I was gonna
description
say.
at
Apple's
all.
doing better
Yeah.
here. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, because like Android does have really good permissions, but it's not exactly user friendly. Linux and FreeBSD both, of course, have great permissions, but that's very unuser friendly. And I think it's important to add a level of user friendliness to this, and that means partially not just calling it permissions, but like making it really GUI based, simple to do.
Yeah, and another thing about permissions, I wasn't really going to talk about this, but it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about how iOS makes them more prominent. So
Uh huh.
in the App Store on Android, you can view what app permissions are requested by that app before you download it, but you have to go into the like information section of the app and then click on the permissions. It's not something that's front and center when you're looking at the app. Um, and iOS
Yeah.
has never had where you could preview the permissions beforehand at all. There wasn't like a hidden menu or anything. But what they're doing now is they're doing something where in the App Store's like feed, before you even get to the information section, like above where it would show how large the app is or anything like that, it shows the permissions in a very easily digestible way, and it'll specify, like for location, for example, one of the new features is that you can choose to grant precise location versus general location. Well, if an app only ever is going to request general location, then it'll show that in here. Um,
And like for like a lot of weather apps, for example, general's
yeah.
fine. Yeah.
And so it's built into the App Store, and it's like frontline and center where it's not a menu deep where you can view
Yeah.
permissions are going to be requested by that app. And the other thing is that Android's permission system is so complicated, but it's not something that you can, for most apps, deny. It's you accept the permissions or you don't use the app. For a
Yeah, and I mean, aside from microphone,
Yeah,
camera, storage, I mean, it does ask for those now, and Android's gotten a lot better at
yeah,
that. With like they've copied iOS in a good way of allow while using app versus allow all the time for
mhm,
permissions. But location, having this fine-tuned location access is really nice. And I'm actually pulling up an Android app right now just to look at the permissions, and it is a little more difficult to find than it should be. And so I kind of hope that, like, I appreciate that it shows like in-app purchases and contains ads front and center, but I would like more information about things like permissions front and center as
yeah.
well.
Like I had to, because I wasn't sure. I had remembered at some point seeing permissions within the App Store, but I didn't remember where it was. And so I went to
Uh-huh.
the Google Play Store on the website to validate that when I was looking through all this and when Apple had initially announced it, and I was like, wow, that's really like not something that most. I mean, unless you're already a permission hawk, it's not something you're ever going to think of. It's so deep in there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that Apple is, in a way, they've been for a while now, and this helps, but they're doing a good job of making people into more permission conscious people.
Yeah, and I think that's also important is people to realize what's
Yeah.
going on the
Like
internet and on their
if you
devices.
know
So,
what all an app is collecting and you just don't care, that's fine. That's your choice.
yeah,
But
but you need to be
yeah.
aware.
So the other thing that they are changing is they've had sign in with Apple for a while now, but the issue is that if you had an existing account, you couldn't convert it over to sign in with Apple. They are
Mm.
finally adding that ability where websites will be able to offer you a conversion to sign in with Apple.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
which is nice because
That's
like
cool.
for me, I've been trying to move away from Google services. There's some things that I want to keep using on Google, and some things that I
Yeah.
would like to not have tied in with Google. And like I use sign in with Google a lot because that's what I had used before, and it's nice to
Right,
be able
right.
to kind of just um, transition my account so that Google stops getting new data. And Apple doesn't get any data from the sign in with Apple other than that you signed into that app.
Yeah,
So
yeah, they're better about that kind of
yeah.
control.
Well, since
The
they're
thing
not
I
trying to
will
make
say is
money
I
off
still
of your information, they just don't need that info. It's a cost for them rather
yeah.
than a benefit.
Right, right, right. And I mean, from a security standpoint and being a security researcher myself, my preference is still every single account that I have is completely individually separate and using its own 16-digit randomized password. But that's just not convenient for people. I mean, with LastPass, it's pretty convenient, but
Yeah,
like,
and I mean,
and other password
it depends
managers,
on the
but
app. Like, I don't
it's
use this for anything important. But
yeah,
like, if
yeah.
I'm just
Because like obviously, if somebody breaches your Apple account somehow, whether there's a flaw or whether you just don't configure your privacy enough, which like you do
yeah,
obviously, but maybe a normal user misses something, that could potentially grant them access to a lot of things. Um, but yeah, as long as you're aware of it, and I think if you do a good job of keeping your Apple account secure, then it's okay.
yeah,
And with Google the same way too. Obviously, there's the privacy of they collect data on you. But the sign in with Google features, like Google is really good about making great security convenient as
yeah.
well. That's something they've been good at. As simple as for a lot of people, hitting yes on your phone to sign
Mhm.
in, and in some instances having essentially a passwordless Google.
Yeah. Um, okay, so that's it for privacy. There's a FaceTime updates that they added. So they added picture-in-picture, which is nice. They improved the quality up to I think it's 1080p now instead of 720p, which is great. Um,
Yeah.
but for me, the most important change, even though it's not something I'm ever, I mean, it might come in handy in chats that I'm in, but it's not something that I personally need to take advantage of. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so everyone's used to with video chat apps where it will make the person speaking the prominent person in the video chat. The issue for certain people is that if you're using sign language to communicate rather than speaking, it's never going to be able
Mm.
to make you the prominent person. And what they have done with FaceTime is they've actually added in sign language detection. And so if it detects somebody using sign language, it will make them the prominent person always while they're using sign language.
So that's really cool. My question is it going to detect me doing this as sign language? That's my concern.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how it works in reality.
We'll have to see how
Yeah.
accurate it is, and I mean that from a person like I talk with my
My
hands, right?
assumption is
um,
that they are running something that specifically looks for like multiple actual sign language gestures in a row.
probably, yeah, and probably ones that are more
Yeah.
common, specific ones. Yeah.
We'll see how it works, but it's one of those features that like is so helpful for the people that need it. It's just nice to see.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, even just trying is
Yeah.
really good.
And then let's move on um to the iOS 14 specific updates. Um so um this is actually on both, but there's a reason, and I'll explain in the iPad portion why I'm splitting this up. Widgets. Um, widgets
Yes,
are coming to iOS. Now that's a really big deal.
they are.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, no, no, right. I'm saying like yeah, they are, and I mean
Um,
that's great and all. If you see my phone here, there's a widget here, and I've had that widget for like the ability to
uh,
do that for about a
yeah,
decade.
and you know what else? macOS has also had that ability for like more than a decade.
Yeah,
It's
so like it's
it's not
about
even
time to
copying
get it on
Android. It's
iOS.
for one, visually, it's copying Windows Phone.
It is, yeah.
Because, like,
I mean,
Windows Phone had for their live tiles, it had 3 sizes. This has 3 sizes. Uh,
so is it full? I can't remember the sizes. Is it just full width and then like four apps worth and then one app worth,
so the
or
small version is 2 by 2. Now, as a side note for the 2 by 2 size, it is not specifically interactable. And so what that means is like it'll be more of an informational
okay,
display, but if you click on it, it just launches you into the app. And
okay,
then there is the medium size, which is 2 by 4, and this is the normal interactable one that you would expect, just like a wide widget on Android. So if you have a music
okay,
widget, you can control playback. If you have, um, something, like I was gonna say Google shortcuts, Apple shortcuts widget,
uh
you can interact with those shortcuts via the widget, things like that. Um,
now the 2x2s though are still stackable, right?
yes, I'll explain the
Okay,
stackable in a second, but yes,
yeah,
so
yeah. I figured. I just wasn't sure if
Um,
those were included.
so, yeah, it's just pretty much that you can't like add buttons to it that you would interact with in that size. Um,
Okay,
and
okay,
then now the widget can launch you into um a specific page based on the widget that you choose, from my understanding, rather than it just
okay,
opening the app like the icon would.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a large size, which is, I believe it's 4x4.
Okay,
So,
that's nice. Pretty
um,
big widgets then at that point,
yeah.
yeah.
And then the other really cool thing that they're doing with the widgets, and for me, this is actually much more helpful because initially with widgets, I'm like, oh, cool. I might use a couple of them, but it's not really that big of a deal for me because when I used Android, I actually didn't use widgets a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Because I found that for me to use widgets the way that I would want to, I would have to have, either a bunch of really small widgets, which I just didn't like the look of, or I'd have to have like entire pages taken up. Um,
Right,
but they are
yeah.
adding stackable widgets. So you can actually both do this manually, where you can, um, put a widget on your home screen and then grab another widget of the same size and stack it on top and stack another one on top. And you can have 4, 5, 6, however many you need. I don't know what the limit is. I'm sure there is some limit.
It's probably 5 is my random guess, because 3 takes up a good amount of the
Based based
the
on
like
the smart
sizing.
stack part, which I'll talk about in a second, I think it's going to be more than 5 because I'm pretty sure I saw
Okay.
smart stacks with more than 5.
Okay.
Um, But so for me, the stackable widgets on their own changes things because one of the examples that I want out of widgets is quick access to balance of like my, just general account with my different bank accounts. And
Yeah.
on Android, I had done that for a while, but I didn't like having a page taken up with, this bank and this bank and this card and then my like stocks on top of that.
Right.
Whereas,
Well, and it would take up a lot of space for you since you have so many millions of dollars. And so like then it just becomes this huge number, right?
yes, that's how
So
it
then it's
works. Is
like
it's more widgets per zero. No, it's just like I liked having that quick access to my information, and now I can have a stack that has my my Robinhood stocks, my bank account one, my bank account two, and it only takes up
yeah.
one 2x4 spot, and I can just swipe through
Yeah.
them. So
And
that's
I think Google's going to copy
oh
that.
for sure,
Yeah, because
for
like
sure.
realistically as a programmer, you can do that as an individual widget on Android, obviously, but but it would only be a widget for that app. So you would have to like install an app that is a widget specifically that links to other
Yeah.
apps to do it
The
on Android
one
right
issue
now.
that Android's going to run into when they do copy it is it's going to
Mhm.
look terrible because widgets are not consistent on Android. You can a lot of widgets are,
Yeah.
boxes, but there's also a lot of widgets that aren't.
Yeah, and widgets are super resizable. As we know, like one of the benefits of Android is having, the ability to size literally
Yeah.
anything anywhere you want. And if you're using a custom launcher, you can have apps in positions that are half
Mhm.
positions and stuff.
And
And so that's going to add
getting into
complication.
that, I think that we're going to see launchers copy that within a couple months, whereas it's going to be years before Android has it in a refined way that you would expect an actual
I
OS
bet,
integration to be.
yeah, I bet Nova Launcher is going to be the first to grab
It's either
adoption
going to
of
be
it. I
Nova
bet they
Launcher
are.
or I can't remember the name of the launcher that I used. It wasn't Nova, but there was another really good launcher.
There's been a few good ones,
Oh
so I don't know
crap.
which it would be. Nova Launcher is kind of the go-to for me. I've tried Microsoft Launcher; it is actually really nice, so it wouldn't surprise me if they tried to copy it as well. But I definitely, I like the idea of it, and I think this is a good implementation. And Android will probably eventually have a bubble system where, like, if you stack widgets, those widgets have to specifically support stacking, and they like for widgets that you can have all these different shapes and sizes of, they'll be like, okay, if you're gonna stack it, the widget has to default to a specific sizing and design,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you could have like, oh, this widget can look all wonky unless you put it in a stack, then it uses a different
hmm
styling.
Action Launcher was the one that I was thinking of.
Oh yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
one, that one. I
Because
found Nova better, but
yeah,
yeah, Action was a
Action
really good
Launcher
one.
was from what I remember the first one to integrate the ability to have widgets that are you swipe up on the icon to pull up the widget, for example.
Yes,
They were the
yes.
first ones to
Action
do.
Launcher, in my opinion, was better than Nova for a while. Actually, they were adding a lot of cool
Yeah.
stuff like that.
And so like I feel like just from what I've seen from that dev, he's more likely to just be like, "Oh yeah, I'll just make it work however it looks." Um,
Yeah,
and I mean
yeah.
that's really what you're gonna need for Android for a while because like iOS widgets are a
Hmm.
very consistent design style of it has this
Yeah.
box. Everything within the box can change, but it's this box. And so it's really
Yeah,
easy to
yeah.
make them stack.
And that's one of the both ups and downs of both platforms. Is like it's nice on Android to have the
Mhm.
flexibility, and it's nice that there's the ability to do custom launchers. So something like this could be added as early as tomorrow. But then also the ability for iOS to do it in such a consistent manner.
It allows them to
There's
easily
there's
do the
positives and
stackable
negatives to
features,
both.
yeah.
Right, right. And like Android could easily do it with a custom launcher. In fact, they could have already done it. I don't even see that being that much programming, but it's just not going to be as smooth and pretty.
Yeah, and it's gonna be one of those things where it's like only power users are gonna wanna use it because it's gonna be visually a little bit jarring.
Right.
Whereas
Well, and compatibility. Some apps, like some widgets, let you
yeah,
scroll.
that's also true.
So like that could be a
Yeah.
problem. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas like this is gonna be one of those things where I think Smart Stack, which I'll talk about in just a second, I think that's gonna be something a lot of people want to use on Android or on iPhone. So
Yes.
as for this
Yes.
smart stack that we've been mentioning a little bit here and there, what this is it's a stack of widgets that you can just drag out a smart stack, and it will curate widgets based on the apps that you use, and it tries to have like a priority system so that, and this is both a mixture of learning how you use your phone, and also app developers can give like an indicator to the OS as to when it thinks that it should be the prominent widget. But it's essentially the stack of widgets, but it just shows you whichever one the OS it thinks is the most pertinent to you at the time. Um,
Now, is there a way to manually do it though? Is there a way to be like, oh, I want this widget to show at 6 a.m., this widget to show at 8
no,
a.m.? Is there any kind of manual
no,
ability there? Okay, no. Okay.
no. That and at that point, that wouldn't be a smart stack. That would just be programming stacks. Um,
It would be, yeah,
um,
yeah. I bet you Android's gonna have that ability when Google finally gets
Yeah, for
this
sure.
functional. But
But
yeah.
the idea and the goal of Smart Stack, and I doubt it'll be like this in iOS 14, but I'm sure it will eventually get there, is that especially if there's anything that you consistently want to be the prominent thing, it will be the prominent thing at
Mm-hmm.
that time. It'll eventually get good enough, whether it's that you manually keep going to the same one at that time, and it'll just
Right.
eventually learn, oh, you've gone to this every day at 6. We know that this should be the one we show you at 6.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually it'll learn that. Um, and then what's all
Yeah, that's not too hard of a thing for it to do
no.
either. That
And
makes
then what's
sense. Yeah.
also nice is that any stack that you manually create, you can enable the smart stack feature on. And so rather than the general smart stack being just any widgets that it thinks are relevant based on your usage, you can make
Right.
you can make a stack of, I'll use my financial one for example, of my financial one, and if I consistently want to check stocks at bell open and bell close, eventually it'll learn to show me my Robinhood just overall amount, or the stocks apps, stocks that I have selected in that widget at the time that that would happen, but it'll then
Yeah.
at other times just show me my balance. And so you
Yeah.
can have your manually curated stacks be smart, or you can have the general smart stack widget switch between its choice of widgets.
Yeah. And that
So
makes sense. And I think it's a cool feature. I think in some ways widgets on iOS right now are better than Android. I do think Google's going to get real hard on that pretty quick because that's been a big arguing point for Android for a long time.
I also think
And
that
so
this is
they,
going
yeah,
to, in some ways, improve widgets on Android, because a lot of
yeah.
developers kind of built widgets a long time ago and just kind of forgot about them. They don't, it's not the
Oh,
type
yeah.
of
A lot of them are
thing.
half-assed and
Yeah,
ugly.
well, I
Yeah.
mean, even then, it's not even necessarily half-assed. A lot of them were built 3, 4, 5 years ago and just never updated, and so they were built well for the time, but things have changed, and
Yeah.
they haven't
Hmm.
had reason to go back. Whereas now, every app development team, obviously, for bigger companies, they have separate teams for iOS versus Android, but a lot of people
Yeah.
are now going to have to go back and look at how do they want their widgets to work, and if they're already reevaluating or newly evaluating iOS widgets, they might as well take that idea of what they think is the good user experience now and just bring it to Android. They're already
Yeah.
taking the time
No,
to
I
put in
agree.
that
Yeah.
thought
Yeah.
and work, so then they just have to do the coding.
Yeah. I mean, they've already got the graphics files
Yeah,
and stuff that are going to be pretty similar at
yeah.
least. So, and this is continuing to go down the list of, oh, take a feature from Android, kind of make it Apple like, and doing that enough. Again, like, I mean, I'm gonna knock them because yeah, Android's had widgets for like a decade, but at the same time, like these are the kinds of things that start to make somebody that is a pretty heavy power Android user um, even have any kind of consideration towards going to iOS, right? Like some of these additions are like, okay, I kind of almost like I have considered it. There are things holding me back still, but like this is definitely in the right direction.
And then, so that's really it for widgets on iOS 14 in specific. The next thing I want to talk about for iPhone is it's actually an accessibility feature, although this is just going to be a power user feature more than accessibility. So they are adding in double and triple tapping the back of your iPhone to do certain actions. And it's not like certain actions that Apple chooses. It's like it can tie into shortcuts. And so you can pretty much do whatever you want with that shortcuts let you do,
Yeah.
which is a lot.
Oh
Because
yeah. Oh yeah. There's a ton of
for
stuff.
those that don't know,
I mean,
shortcuts can tie into apps that can run Python and JavaScript and other things. And so you can pretty much do whatever you want with a double tap of your phone that doesn't break Apple's rules.
yep. And like, I mean, honestly, like, you could have your lights in your house turn on with a double tap, turn off with a triple
Oh yeah,
tap. Like
if you
all kinds
if
of
you
cool
hate
stuff.
Siri and you want Google Assistant and that's for some reason been like a reason to hold off on getting an iPhone, you will
Yep.
literally, and Marquez has a video on his YouTube or on his Twitter, so you can go look at this in action. You can literally just double tap the back of your iPhone and it will launch Google Assistant if you set that up.
Yeah. And this kind of plays into a theme that I feel like we've been seeing in iOS and iPad OS more so than Mac OS, but power user features that are hidden away from regular users so that it's not like it's giving people the ability to do things that Apple doesn't really want you to do, but you can only do them if you know what
Yeah,
you're doing.
this is
And that's cool.
yeah, we'll talk more about power user stuff at the end because I have a point I wanted to make about that, but I think it kind of sums up a lot of things. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, Apple's been doing a lot for power users and it's very interesting. Um,
And yeah, and they keep doing it through things like
yeah,
accessibility and stuff, which
or
is
shortcuts,
hides it
which is
away.
not something that's necessarily front and center for everyone either.
Oh yeah,
Um,
you could probably ask iPhone users, and probably 75% of them don't use shortcuts and maybe don't even know what it
yeah, I
is.
mean, like they might see it because
Like,
when
yeah,
shortcuts first became so for those that don't know, shortcuts was not originally made by Apple, which is actually why it has features that
yeah,
Apple would never add. But it was something that was an existing app that Apple bought and just pretty much
yeah.
integrated into the OS in a more in-depth way. So it'd be like if Google decided to buy Tasker and make it a core part of Android.
Android has had Tasker and IFTTT for a long time, though.
I know, but iOS also
Yeah,
had shortcuts via this other app for a while. What I'm talking about is
yeah,
if they bought it and integrated it into the OS, which
yeah.
they
Right,
don't
right.
really
That
need
actually
to
reminds me too. I
because,
need to set up
yeah,
Tasker.
they don't really need to because Android apps have more control by default, and so they don't need OS
Yeah.
integration. But it would be like if Google decided to specifically go out of their way to add features for Tasker.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And I feel like they just aren't because it's a lot of development time when something like IFTTT is really user
yeah,
friendly and is easy to
yeah.
use.
So the next big change to iOS is the app library. So this is very Android-like in some ways and not at all Android-like in others. So
Yeah,
you can hide apps from your home screen now, which is very Android-like. You don't have to have everything on the screen. However,
yeah,
it's not just a list of all of your apps. It's iOS's category system is how the app library works, and there is no as of right now. This may change before launch, but as of right now, there is no you picking which categories they go in. It's these apps go into this category. Deal with it.
it's interesting, and that makes it Apple like
Yeah.
for
Now
sure.
for me, and we've talked about this off the podcast, but like I already like don't really care. Like I like the ability to hide the apps. I don't really care how this launcher is configured or the library is configured
Mm-hmm.
because when I want to use an app that is not front and center, I don't go find it on my home screen anyway. On iOS, for those that don't use iPhone, if you want to search for an app, you just pull down. So for
Yeah,
me,
right, right,
I
yeah.
just pull down, type in the app name, and launch the app. It's faster than finding it. It's faster than going into the app launcher. This is how I did it on Android as well. I specifically in Action Launcher set up so that swipe down did an app search. Um,
Uh-huh.
and it's just a much more efficient way than trying to scroll through a list.
It is, yeah, and I use that all the time too on Android. It's like either using Google Assistant or using search
Hmm.
to pull up an app, and so just the ability to hide them is a great
Yes.
benefit. Now I personally still like the home screen being able to be organized the way Android organizes it, but where you can
Hmm.
make shapes with your apps and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's nice to see the ability to hide stuff because every person that I know with an iPhone that I work on, right? And I do IT, so I do work on iPhones, is either they have 100 pages of
Hmm.
apps or they have that one folder, if they're a slightly more power user, that has 100 pages of
Yes.
apps. And I'm just
Um,
like,
Now, one other thing that ties into this app library and hiding apps that is really nice, and I think it's something that most people won't need, but the people that use their phone heavily for work, but are also trying to um, disconnect from work when they're not working, especially in a work from home scenario where you kind of are always in work mode. This is really
yeah.
cool. So you can hide entire homepages, and they don't delete them. They don't move them to the app library and just like they're gone. It's you can just turn them off and then turn them back on by just going into wiggle mode and then like pressing one button to turn off the page.
Wiggle
Yes,
mode.
I love that that's just what we're going with now.
That's the official name
Yeah.
now. Now let me ask you this: when you do hide it, does it are those apps available in the
So
launcher, or are they
all apps
completely
are
hidden?
always in
Period.
the launcher at all times.
Okay, so that's like Android then.
Yes.
Okay, okay,
Um,
okay.
and so when you hide the homepage, it just hides the homepage. So you can have a work email widget and your work related apps on a dedicated, let's say you have it on your second page normally, so that it's
Yeah.
separate from your main homepage, but then just, oh, okay, I'm off work, I want to be not in work mode, I don't want to have this stuff readily visible to me, I'm just going to press
Mhm.
a couple buttons and turn the page off.
And I could see them potentially trying to automate this in the future for people too.
Yeah, I could see them adding something
Yeah.
into shortcuts that would allow you to
Yep.
have it be time based where that page gets enabled and disabled. Um,
Like per your work schedule or
the
whatever.
the
Yeah.
one thing with that is I almost feel like if based on Apple, if they were to do that, they would not actually tie it into the Shortcuts app, but rather have a setting somewhere that specifically enables and disables it at certain times and not do much more. Because the
Yeah.
issue again with how Apple thinks about things and with how this would work if it tied into shortcuts is that theoretically another app could then have control over when your home screen is visible.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and that could be
Yeah,
dangerous.
it's something that, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, it probably wouldn't get abused often, but it could be, and if it did, it would be a big problem. So it's something Apple would just
Yeah.
avoid.
Yeah, and I could see them just tying it into a time thing or tying it into calendar somehow.
Yes.
One of those two things.
And
Yeah.
then the next thing, so iPhone is getting picture-in-picture video. iPad has already had this for a while, but it's coming to iPhone finally. It's resizable. It's what you would expect. You launch a video in full screen, you go home, the video just moves out. Unfortunately, because of the way that Google is in paywalling YouTube videos from being able to be
Yeah.
picture in picture, and the way that Apple is in that they don't allow OS features to be paywalled. Um, this will not happen on the YouTube Android or the YouTube iOS app anytime soon. However, Safari and I believe Firefox on iPad can
Firefox, yes. Yes.
can launch the YouTube video into picture in picture, and so that'll just work on iPhone as well. I'm sure that the
Yeah, yeah.
Firefox iPhone app will need to be updated to do it, but they'll be able to.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, as long as WebKit supports it, and obviously it will. And the other thing I want to mention about Firefox, and I know Safari can do this as well, is it's not just YouTube. It's any video you're
Yeah,
playing.
I
So like if you're
specified
watching something
YouTube
on like
because YouTube is the one where
because it's the
the
restrictive one.
algorithm
Yeah,
has
yeah,
built in.
yeah. Right, right.
Um,
That makes sense.
and what's really cool too, though, about the picture-in-picture video, this is my favorite feature. You can hide the video completely and just have the audio playing.
So like Android.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, for picture-in-picture, like, yeah, sure, that's cool, but like I feel like for me, Most of the time that I want to, at least when I'm using a mobile device, most of the time that I like a phone specifically, not a tablet, that I
Yeah,
want
yeah, yeah.
to have the audio playing, I'm generally doing other stuff. And so like it's fine to have the picture in picture. Like I'll want that in a lot of cases. But if I'm doing other stuff, then there's going to be times where I want to hide it. And being able to just drag it off the screen, do my stuff, and then drag it back on very quickly is very nice and easy.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a key point and a big deal. Yeah.
And then the next feature that I wanted to talk about is car keys. This is what it sounds like. You will be able to use your iPhone as keys to unlock and to start your car. So the
Yeah.
way that this will work, for one, it's a specific singular BMW car to start. And the way that this will work
Yep.
initially is NFC. So just like how you can, use payments for stuff in store, for transit, you can use your phone to unlock dorm rooms, for example, via NFC. They're
Yeah.
just adding that tech for cars for now, but eventually, this is what's really cool. Eventually, cars are going to be shipping that can utilize the U1 chip that's seen in the newest model iPhones. And for those that don't know, this is like a specific type of chip that is supposed to be more location precise. The reason that Apple put this in there primarily is for improving Find My iPhone and for when they
Yeah.
eventually release their rumored tile competitor, which will be like little tags, and they can
Mm-hmm.
they're just much more location precise chips that are also very short distances. And so eventually cars are going to be coming out that will be able to detect that the iPhone is just like your key fob for your car in your car, at which point
Yeah, so you just get up, walk up, open the door, get
and then
in, and
start it. Yeah.
it's ready.
And it'll work even
Yeah,
if it's in your
yeah,
gym bag in the back of the car or whatever. Just
yeah.
as long as it is in the vehicle, it should be able to start it. Um,
Right. Well, and then to go further, electric vehicles, a lot of them, you can set them up to, like, you don't have to press a button to start
yeah,
either, right? So you would just walk up, get in, buckle, and press the gas, and
yes,
you're good
that
to
yeah,
go.
and without having to
So it's a
carry your
great
fob
idea.
too.
Yeah, yeah. And now the one thing I will say, well, a couple things here is the first thing I will say is I'm sure security, obviously, especially as a security person, is the first concern I have with it. But I've seen people complaining about how this is only for a specific model of a specific BMW. But actually, it's great to be starting on one
Yeah.
car
Well, and then also
because if they come across security
part of the reason it's
problems,
like that is that initially to start your car, obviously you have to tap to get in the door, but then you have to place it on this specific model BMW has a Qi charger for your phone, and you
yeah,
have to actually place the iPhone on the Qi charger in order to start the car. And so it's like a
and
very
yeah,
specific location too, because it's not just the chip.
yeah.
So
So we'll just have to see, what possible security issues come into play with it, but NFC doesn't have a horrible track record of security
yeah,
necessarily.
it's one of
So,
those things where it's like people
um,
have to get in contact with you to take the data pretty much. Like they have
yeah,
to get in close
yeah,
enough proximity,
yeah,
or they've
right,
they've like at least bumped you. Whereas with the
yeah,
U1 sensor, they do have to get relatively close, but it can be a foot or two away.
yeah,
Um,
and that's what I was more so going at was the U1 is the one that I have a little bit more concern about, but we just there are ways around it, right? I mean, is it is it much worse than your fob,
yeah,
right?
that's what I was
Like
gonna get at
that's
too,
the
is because
thing.
it's like you know these things are going to be concerns, and there will. I have no doubt there's going to be a car stolen because someone figured out how to get through the U1 chip security. However,
Yeah,
that is not a widespread problem. There is not, with fobs, there are security issues and people are able to bypass the fobs or steal the data for the fobs. But it's not
yeah,
something that's happening where it's like a mass problem. And, um, it's not going to be like that with the iPhone. Like, I highly doubt that there's going to be something that's so easy to take advantage of that just people's cars are getting jacked left and right.
yeah,
At which
yeah.
point,
The only concern I have is if something serious does come out. As we know, aside from Tesla, most of these car companies don't do updates very often.
yes, but they don't need to. Because the thing is that with the way that the iPhone's lock system works, you can just revoke the permission for the car.
Oh,
And
that's a
so
good point. Yeah.
so you can, and I actually from my understanding too, part of the security, because it's tying into the ability to revoke the permission, is that it has to connect and authenticate with Apple's servers. And so it can't be a
Mm-hmm.
skimming device. It would have to be another iPhone. And it would have to be another iPhone that
Right.
would have to have access to your account. So they would have to compromise your account, get close to your phone, and presumably be on a jailbroken iPhone. Which
Yeah.
Apple
Yeah.
probably
That
will
makes
build
sense.
into the car key system some kind of jailbreak validation and just make it not work if it's jailbroken. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so that
Which is
alone,
gonna suck for some
yeah,
people.
that alone
But
can
yeah.
at least cover the like someone buying a vulnerability and taking advantage of it type thing. It can stop those.
Right.
Yes, sure. Security researchers will no doubt find a way to steal cars with this. And I'm sure there will be cars actually stolen with this. But it is going to be
Yeah.
extremely uncommon, and it's probably easier to lift someone's keys than it is to lift someone's phone and unlock it. And it's probably easier to lift someone's keys out of their pocket than it is to go through all of this process.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. So that's what really matters is you make it harder than the other method,
Yeah.
then it's
And
not
like
going to
if your
be
phone's
targeted.
stolen, you can remote wipe it, you can revoke access.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of ways that you can make it so that your phone cannot be used to unlock the car. The
Yeah.
other concern that would come up for a lot of people about this is if your phone's battery dies. iOS or iPhones have already had a feature for several years now where they actually reserve a small amount of the battery and they die like a percent or two early. And the reason they do that is if you have NFC payments enabled for transit, or if you have NFC enabled for unlocking dorm rooms, um, that you can still get in. So they reserve.
And it works even with it powered off, right? Like even when it's shut down, or do you have to turn it back on?
No, so like when it dies, it doesn't die. It goes
Yeah.
into this mode. It
Okay.
it
Okay. That's what I was asking is I wasn't sure if it dies with a couple percent and then you can turn it
No, no,
back
no, no,
on to
no.
do
It
these things.
so
It just
yes,
does
so
it.
it dies like
Okay.
an Android phone would die, but instead of like on an Android phone when it dies, it leaves enough battery to show you that it's dead, like it to turn the screen on and
Yeah.
show that. On iPhone, it does that
Yeah.
too. It just saves enough that it also has some time in this power reserve for it to power the NFC chip, which is obviously not a lot, to do specifically
Yeah. Yeah.
transit
That's
payments. You
nothing.
can't do like you can't do payments in store because you have to Face ID authenticate those, or Touch ID
Yeah.
authenticate those. But you
Right.
can
But you don't want to get locked out of your car, your house,
correct.
or being able to go
Yeah,
home.
and with iOS 14, they reserve enough that it works for 5 hours. So your phone can die, and 4 hours later, you can still get into your car.
Okay, that's
That
that's good.
that pretty
That's a
much
good.
solves the case. There's
And I mean,
not,
everybody has chargers, so like if it does somehow become 5 hours later,
yeah,
like just go charge your phone in the
yeah.
store, for
But
five
it's like it's
minutes.
one of those things where it's like, how many circumstances are there where you know, most people, their phone's not going to die before they would get back to their car anyway. But if that happens,
Yeah,
it might be, oh, my phone died, let's say at a concert or something. I finished the concert and went back. That's an hour or two later, not 5.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, and even longer concerts, you don't see them go
and
5.
and
Yeah,
even then, you
most
wouldn't
stuff. Yeah,
generally go to the concert with your phone dead. It would
right,
die
right,
during
exactly.
the
Yeah, yeah.
process.
Yeah, during a concert, during a movie,
Yeah,
during a conference or something like WWDC in person, if that ever happens
yeah.
again.
Um,
So yeah, yeah, it's cool.
And then the next feature that this comes from Android, but I have no doubt that it will actually get used unlike Android. And so Apple calls this app clips. So Google implemented something a while ago in Android where you could essentially launch single page views of an app. Um,
Yeah, they call them progressive web
yeah.
apps, I believe.
Um, uh,
Unless that's
no,
Windows,
I
I
think
can't
that's
remember.
something different. So yeah, it's app preview is what they called it on Android. And so like when we had tried Allo, this is something that came up where you could send somebody an Allo message, and if they didn't have Allo installed, but they had a new enough Android phone, it could essentially download enough that they could respond to that, and then it would just go away.
And we knew somebody that used that exclusively.
Yes, yeah, it was silly.
That,
Um,
yeah, I mean, Allo was silly, but it was also silly to just use the web app and never install it. Just use it when they get
yeah.
messages.
Um,
I thought that was funny. It
um,
was it was great though. I mean, it was cool to see it working.
Yeah, but with that, so the app previews were something that any app could have taken advantage of. And, you could have seen, for example, with the scooters that have popped up, they make it so that there's like a preview app that it just temporarily downloads. You do what you need to unlock the scooter and you go on. A number of
Yeah.
issues with that, though, is that the way that app previews worked on Android, it would be quite an intricate process to go in and do something that requires payment, for example. Really,
Mm-hmm.
app previews were more designed to, like, let's say, even though this never was implemented, I'll use Etsy as an example. Launch, let's say, if you wanted to launch like a 3D model within Etsy of a product, which I don't even know if that's actually a
Yeah.
thing, but just as an example, you want to launch a 3D model from a store of a product. And this was before 3D models were more built into Chrome and more able to run easily. You would be able to download like a single page version of that app, preview the app, do what you need to check that out, and then leave the app,
Mm-hmm.
buy it from the website, whatever.
Yeah, and I feel like the other use was almost like just an app introduction.
Mhm.
Like, oh hey, you don't have Allo, but if I message you and you don't have Allo, it'll be like, hey look, you got a message on Allo, and you'll be like, oh, I want to install
Yeah, it
that.
was literally an app
So
preview.
yeah.
Whereas what
Yeah.
Apple is doing is they are trying to solve a number of situations where you might need to use an app once and then never use it again, or once or twice. And so it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to install it, set up an account, tie your payment information in, or set up Apple Pay or whatever.
Deal with permission
Yeah.
settings and stuff, all the
And
stuff. Yeah.
so this is downloading mini versions of apps that are under 10 megabytes. And
Yeah, so it'll be instant even on crappy
yeah,
connections.
and it will, the way that this works to launch is Apple made a new type of QR code specifically for this as an indicator, both that it's available for NFC tapping and to be scanned if you have like an older iPhone that doesn't have NFC. And
Yeah.
so there'll be a dedicated indicator to indicate that you can launch an app clip. You can launch the app clip and then you press open, or you can launch an app clip from a website. So again, using Etsy as an example, Etsy could,
Mm-hmm.
instead of trying to have you sign in, let's say you're going to buy just one thing from Etsy. You're not planning on setting up an account and shopping with them regularly. You just want to buy something as a gift. You could
Yeah.
easily download a small version of Etsy that is just that product page and then the checkout screen. Something like
Yeah.
that they could program in. Or Yelp could program in integration with like a small restaurant. So you go to the small restaurant's website, but then you check out through Yelp, Grubhub, any other service that might offer checkout,
Yeah.
by just launching a mini version of that app as a one-time checkout. And
Mm-hmm.
then the examples that Apple used as well. So they did use restaurants. They also used scooters. And then, and this is a really good example that I've run into that would have been nice is parking, specifically if you go to another city
Oh
where
man.
they don't
Yeah.
use parking apps that you might use later.
I've ran into that times where it'd be useful. I hated having to set up apps for various parking
Yeah.
accounts. I mean, because I've had to park random places for work, and it's like,
Yeah. And then to go back to what I had mentioned about app previews, where you kind of run into the issue of having to sign into accounts, having to set up payment or whatever, this
yeah,
directly integrates with sign in for Apple. I haven't seen anything that indicates that sign in for Apple will be the only option. Just obviously that's what Apple talked about because they want people to use that.
yeah,
But you could have sign in
yeah,
with Apple, sign in with Google, whatever. Obviously, if you have sign in with Google, you have to have sign in with Apple. But
yeah.
um, they also are allowed to integrate with Apple Pay, and I don't think any Android app previews could integrate with Google Pay, and so that
I don't
immediately
think so
makes it
either.
more
Although
useful.
it'd be hard to know on Android because nobody uses them.
Exactly.
And that's the other thing is I agree with you. I think that Apple has the ecosystem that's able to push it.
Well,
That's one of the
I
advantages they
think
do
that
carry.
just making the QR code and NFC tag immediately makes it more likely to be used. Because there is now an
Agreed. Yeah,
easy
yeah.
way to tell consumers that don't have to really think about it that they can utilize this feature.
Yep. Yep. And I think that's
That
perfect.
that right there shows like Apple definitely thinks things through more than Google when they eventually do it. They do things later, but they think them through.
Yeah. And sometimes I still don't like them as much. Sometimes they are still, not power user,
Yeah.
right? But that's fine.
Yeah.
like widgets, for example. aside from stackable widgets, I still like widgets better in
Mhm.
Android. I would like stackable to be possible. But you know, you have these ups and downs, and I just feel like over time, I do feel like iOS and iPad OS are becoming less and less restrictive and boring for the power
Mhm.
user. And that's a big, I think that's a big difference, and a big reason that you know, Apple's being more successful is they're tying to power users more, and they're tying to budget users more.
Yeah. And then that's really it for the main things I wanted to talk about with iPhone. The other thing though that I wanted to mention that's again, I had mentioned about Android updates when we were talking about messages. Something that this is very different with iPhone. So every iPhone since the iPhone 6S, which released in 2015, is getting this update.
Yep.
That includes the iPhone SE first gen, which released in 2016 but was very cheap. So a cheap phone from 4 years ago and the high end phone from 5 years ago are getting such like the most significant upgrade we've seen in 7 years.
Oh yeah, this is a huge deal.
There's not a
Yeah.
single Android phone that has ever gotten a 7-year-old Android update, except for
Oh yeah.
ones that were made by the community after the fact.
Yep. So pretty amazing. I'm glad they're
Yeah.
doing it. All right. So iPad also is getting an update, iPad OS. I'm still really glad that these are separate things now, iPad OS and iOS.
Yes.
Was that a change made with 13? That was made with 13, wasn't it?
I think it was either 13 or 12. I
Okay. Okay.
think it was 12, but 13 was a
I think it's a great
13
move.
was a huge update. That was like the where it really differentiated itself from iOS.
Yeah.
Um, Now, iPadOS 14 is interesting. It's a big update, but it's not anywhere near as big as iPhone's update in some ways
Yeah.
because let's talk about widgets first. Um, so the new widgets are coming to iPad. However, they aren't placeable. I mean, iOS or iPhone widgets aren't placeable anywhere you place them in specific. Like they have to be placed all the way to the left or right. They can't be in the middle, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
iPadOS, you can't place widgets in the app grid. They still stay on the side. And if
Interesting.
initially I was like, "Oh, that sucks," that's stupid. Either way, I still think it's a bummer. But I thought that was stupid. But I realized the reason why, and it makes sense. On iPhone, you don't rotate the home screen. And so it doesn't have to
Yeah.
rearrange where everything is placed. And that could be problematic with how iPhone keeps everything to a grid, especially. But even then, even on Android, for those that do that, it kind of just looks bad. Your home screen doesn't ever look as good in its horizontal view
This is true.
when you
Yeah.
can do that. And so that's really what it seems like is why is that you can rotate the home screen. Like Apple's, as much as they've been pushing the idea of using it as a laptop in some ways, the idea of Apple seeing the iPad as the future of a computer is that it can be a laptop and a tablet and kind of just be whatever. And that's how they see the future of computing with this device. And
Yeah.
if you try and force things into the horizontal viewpoint, then you're kind of getting rid of that. At which point you're getting rid of one of the benefits of the tablet, and so they don't want to do that, and so they're keeping it to that one
Yeah.
side. I
Because they want you to buy a Mac if that's the direction you really are going to
Yeah,
go.
um,
Is where you're
I
trying to do that kind
I
of
do
stuff.
think
Yeah.
eventually we'll see them bring this to the home screen, but I think that they're going to want to figure out a better way to do it, and they just want to take their
Yeah.
time and be deliberate. It's if you were to just do it now, you'd run into issues where depending on app layout, you'd sometimes have it where depending on if you rotate it, you'd have like sections of emptiness that don't make sense for the fact
Yeah.
that iOS forces apps to the top corner. Um,
Right.
and so it just would not fit in the way that iOS is built and designed. Um, However, the new widgets are still coming. Anything that is built for iPhone widget system can be taken advantage of in this. Smart stacks will even be a part of the new widget system. Stackable widgets, you can still get some of that. It's just not directly on the home screen in the way that it is on the iPhone.
Yeah.
But it ultimately does end up making some sense given the context of how they see the iPad as a product.
Yeah. No,
So,
that makes sense. And yeah,
um,
I guess I don't. I still would like it, but I don't. I don't hate
yeah,
it.
that's where I'm at. Is
Yeah.
like when I first heard about it, I was like not upset, but like I was just annoyed. I thought that was a dumb decision. Now I
Yeah.
think it's the smart decision from looking at it as how Apple views products. It's just not necessarily the decision I want them to have made.
Yeah, I
So,
agree. Yeah.
the next thing, and this is a really big update, universal search. Now, the naming of this is kind of stupid. So they had Spotlight Search on iPad, and now they're switching to
Right.
Universal Search, even though Universal Search on iPad is much more like Spotlight Search on Mac. So the way that this works is it's a more compact UI, but that's not really the important part. This new version of search on the iPad can be initiated from anywhere over any app. I don't know what the gesture is
That's a
to
big
launch
deal.
it without a keyboard, but there is some kind of like gesture to do it. But you can just
Yeah.
from anywhere you can launch your search tool, and then
It's like a Windows key. I mean, that's what I use the Windows key for,
exactly.
you know. So,
And then
yeah.
there's also like there's a Windows app that you can, or not an app, I guess. There's a program you can download for Windows where you press like Windows and space, and it launches a search bar directly over the middle of your screen. It's actually really nice. And
Yeah.
this is kind of like that, where it's like the search comes up over the middle of your screen. You can search for anything. I mean, iOS's search is already pretty comprehensive, but this is just much more
Yeah.
improved. So if you're searching the web with this, then it is much more refined and just like much more relevant search suggestions. And then if
Yeah.
you are searching for an app, obviously you'll find the app. But if you're searching for, let's say you search for a contact, it should give you more options than it did before to interact with that contact, as well as if it's like you're searching for a name, you can actually decide to, instead of like trying to scroll through the list of contacts in the search bar, there's going to be an option to just use that search to search your contacts. So use that search to search any other app. Um, and so you can use this in a much more useful and like kind of more powerful way to search through
I
everything.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. Yeah, that's really nice. That's and it's actually kind of in some ways is a better implementation than how Windows has it, because Windows can still only use Edge if you want to search the web down there,
Yeah. Whereas
which is just such a huge
iOS
disappointment.
normally, right now searches or anything is defaulted to Safari, but Apple is integrating defaults for web browsers and defaults for email apps across iOS and
Android has
iPadOS.
also had that.
Oh, I know. Um, and
But yeah, it's a good move and is consistently trying to help the iPad be a more usable laptop.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then as far as the defaults go, real quick, also I wanted to mention that was something else that was discussed in the Marquez and the Craig interview. And specifically, Craig was asked why it's just browsers and email.
Hmm.
And he talked about with browsers how they were concerned about, again, malicious intent, where if anything could be flagged as a browser, and a lot of apps have browsers built in, so it wouldn't be hard for them to say, we are a browser, flag us as a browser because we literally have the code for it. Um, and
Yeah.
then now we can all of a sudden become your default. Obviously, this is something that could happen on Android, but doesn't often. But it's not like it
Yeah.
doesn't.
Yeah.
It just doesn't often. We see all the
Yeah.
time issues with Android apps abusing default systems in some way or defaulting permission systems in some way. And so Apple is very much trying to avoid that, and they're not letting just any app flag themselves as a browser to become default. Apple has to
Right.
specifically review and approve them. Initially, it's just going to be the big stuff. They are making sure that smaller browsers, independently developed browsers, will have that ability. Just it'll be a part of the iOS review process to ensure that like Apple will have to okay
Instead of
it
just flipping it
before
on.
that
Yeah.
permission or before that default is enabled for that app.
And can I just dart in here and say, to literally every app developer in the world, please stop putting browsers into your app built in. I just want to open my default browser,
If you're going to
and there are
have it
so
built
many.
in, have it a toggle where you can choose whether or not to launch the built-in browser or not.
Yes, yes, that's exactly the problem I have. Is there's so many apps for Android where you can't have it open up the default browser by default. So you tap a link, and then sometimes it takes you to a page in the app, which you tap another link, which goes to the in-app browser, and then you tap a drop down and then tap open in default browser. It is a huge pain, and it frustrates me. So some people are going to hate me, but I use Bing search instead of Google search on my phone. Okay. And the Bing search app is actually a great app. In fact, Google could learn a thing or two about, stop shaking your
Use
head at me. Google could
DuckDuckGo if
learn
you're
a
not
thing or
going to
two.
use freaking Google.
No, Google could learn a thing about how the fact that the Bing app is dark themed, and Google still hasn't done that with Google's search app. So it's dark themed.
Yeah.
And by the way, Google Assistant is dark themed. It's just Google Search that's not. So anyway, but with the Bing app, I can't have it open those search results in my default browser. It opens in the Bing app browser, which has its own tabs. Even though Microsoft Edge exists for Android, it doesn't open in Edge. It opens in the Bing multi-tab browser. And so every time you open a search, like that's one thing about the Google one is you do a search and you open a link. When you close it and then you do another search and open a link, it gets rid of the prior one. Bing doesn't do that, which yes is nice in case you want to look back in a past search, but also sucks because then, if you're not a user that's paying attention, you end up having, 60 Bing tabs open.
It sounds like you should just not use Bing.
Okay, if we're being honest here, when it comes to search engine tech, Bing and Google, some people will try to tell you they get similar results, and in some cases that's true, but actually no. It's not that one or the other is better. It's, in my opinion, that if you're trying to find the answer to a really complex question, searching in both will get you places of the internet that the either doesn't, where people are talking about it. There have been times where I search for a really hard issue and I find it in Bing and not Google. And
But we're not
versa.
talking about when you're searching for issues like that. We're talking about what you use as your normal daily search engine.
Well, yeah, but general search Bing is fine.
I know,
The only problem is Bing Maps.
But you could use DuckDuckGo. Or
Okay,
you could use Ecosia, which don't they use Bing anyway?
Okay. Yes.
So then
yes,
use
search
that.
engine tech, but then there's the other advantage, right? So you should get paid for your data.
Or you could plant
Bing
trees.
pays you for your data. Bing pays you for your data.
Or you could plant trees.
You get Bing points. And you redeem them for real like Starbucks and stuff.
Or
and so like
you could help the environment.
Okay, but you could also use it to help the environment. So that's the thing is I hate you. So you get this opportunity though where like you're at, like it kind of goes along with the idea of you should own your data, you should get paid for your data. Microsoft's like, yeah, we're using your data to enhance our advertising, so here we'll pay you for your data.
That could be a whole podcast of its own, so we should move on from that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But anyway, I was just bringing that up there. Is thank you Apple for making some of that stuff just so much better.
The next big feature, this is something that I'm personally excited for, Scribble. So what this is so Apple Pencil is something that I actually just recently got and I started messing with and like more than I thought. But one of the issues I've had is there's many times where I'm using the pencil and then I want to go, do something else within the OS and I have to, put my pencil down to type or whatever when yes, typing is going to be much faster, but it would be nice if I'm doing something like just say like a quick search of something to be able to just write it out. It's going to be easier and more convenient to just write it out than it is to, put my pencil down, I have a little stand for it, put it somewhere else, type it out, and then grab my pencil again if I want to keep using my pencil. And it's just sometimes it's nice to just have that feeling of handwriting. So, and so it's nice to have that, but you can't do that in most apps. Well, Scribble changes all of that. What Scribble is Apple is essentially integrating handwriting as text into every text field within the OS on iPadOS. If it is a text field on iPadOS, you can write on it. So that means the search bar, that means any search app, that means anything. And then from there, they are adding a few features to just make it easier to utilize the pencil. So if you want to delete some text, you can just scribble over the text and it deletes it. If you want to highlight a word or a phrase or something to copy or move it, you draw a circle around it. Pretty simple. But then they're adding a lot more to it too for more in-depth use than just writing. So all of the text can be very easily converted into normal typed out text. So if you're again doing like a search within an app, obviously Google isn't going to search handwritten text. So you can write it in there and it just converts it into the normal text. But if you're writing into an app that can have the handwritten text. One of the things as I've been looking at note apps is Notability, for example. You have to pay extra on top of paying for the app in order to be able to search handwritten text. Well, they're just making that part of how text works. So because of Scribble, handwriting text is treated as text even if it's still in handwriting view. And so you can highlight it within any app, treat it like any app, copy paste, move it around, search it, whatever you want to do, as if you would normally be doing with text, but it's in its handwritten look if you want that. And then in addition to that, you can copy handwritten text and then paste it into another app as traditional text. So if you, let's say you like the feeling of writing something out by hand, but you need to have a typed up paper for school, you could handwrite it out, copy paste it, and then just reformat it, like, with spacing and everything, to be that text document you need. And a lot of people have been looking at buying iPads specifically as ways to get rid of paper but still have that paper feel. There's a screen protector called Paperlike that is literally designed to make it feel like you're still writing on paper for people that really like that. And so this is great for that. It's great for just general input, great for just not having to put your pencil away for really dumb reasons. It's a pretty significant change to the OS, in my opinion, in that it just makes the pencil more useful.
I like it. I've never been a heavy stylus person, for sure. I will say that I still prefer Samsung's way of putting the stylus inside the device over these magnetic attachments.
I agree with that part. That's very different, but usability of it though is now much different. And that to me though matters much more. It matters to me much more if using the stylus is going to be useful than where the stylus goes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, for sure. I agree. And I maybe I'll consider getting one. I don't know yet.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this update makes it just much more useful and something that more people who might have not if you don't want it, then you don't want it. But if you were on the fence, I feel like this just makes it a much better experience. I mean, I'll have to wait and see once the public beta comes out how well I like it in practice. But so far as I've been using the pencil, it seems like most of the issues that I have had as far as not being able to do things are solved by this.
And that's good. And Apple has done a pretty good job with trying to make stylus usage usable. I feel like Microsoft's also done a good job of it, whereas I still feel like with Samsung devices, you just don't use it very much.
Yeah.
With Android devices, I should say, not Samsung. It's just not. It's not built the same way. Android still sucks for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, despite the fact that Samsung has a lot of control, they just don't utilize it for that because.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, I mean, smaller screen, you can't do as much.
Well,
anyway,
and I mean, even then though, like I feel like the stylus initially was meant to be, more of a power user tool, but it's kind of just become, I feel like personally, something that they only keep there because they have to with the Note. I don't think that they really based on the fact that they haven't given it that much care, what are the new features they've added recently? Like you can use it to interact with the camera. That's nice. It's nice to have like a little remote for it.
It's actually a cool feature, yeah.
But it's not
just
a
like it's not related to it.
Yeah, I can do that from my Apple Watch.
Yeah, right. There's plenty of other methods to do that.
And it's like they're trying to find ways to keep it a power user tool because they feel like they have to have it. Is more so the sense that I get from Samsung, than that they think this is like a good unique product that they want to keep adding features for because it's a good helpful tool.
And part of me almost wonders if that's just a mistake. I don't think the point of the Note series has never okay, so let me phrase this right. I think from a user standpoint, the point of the Note series has never been about the stylus and has been about the bigger phone with more power user features like a battery and stuff like that.
I think that if they had not tied the name of the phone to the Note, I think they could have gotten rid of it much more easily. I mean, realistically,
they'll get a lot of criticism if they remove it.
Let's be real. Other than a little bit of a design difference, sometimes the Note's not that much different than the higher end Galaxy S phones anyway.
Yeah, so now it is a differentiating feature.
Stylus.
Sorry, say again, it
All
cut
the
out.
Note really is just a Galaxy S with a stylus.
And usually a couple performance bumps and stuff, but that's just because they wait
Yeah,
longer.
but now that Samsung's been
Yeah.
doing the half year
Ultra.
upgrades where they do the higher end one later, it's like you
Yeah,
have the
yeah.
Galaxy series launch, then you have the Note launch at a little bit higher performance, and then you have a new Galaxy launch at a higher performance, and then 6 months later the cycle starts again.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know, like from my experience of using the stylus on the Note, like it is nice for some things, but not really for stylus things. It's almost just nice to have something more precise, not so much for the being able to draw and stuff like
Yeah.
that, you know.
So, and then really that's the last thing with iPad OS that I wanted to cover. The other big thing, again, we talked about updates with iPhone. iPad OS is coming to every iPad since the iPad Air 2, which came out in October of 2014. So we have 6 years of updates on iPad.
It's a pretty big deal there, actually.
Yeah, that's just wild. Yeah, so next up for WordCast today, we're going to be talking about some big changes coming to Mac, both software and then some hardware stuff. And I say some hardware stuff
Yeah.
as if that's not the bigger part of this conversation. So I honestly didn't think this was going to happen anytime soon, but Apple announced macOS 11. It's called Big Sur. We are finally moving away from OS X. I've been annoyed with the OS X name since they got past 10.9. Like 10.10 is just, I don't like that naming scheme.
Yeah. Well, and
Or numeric scheme.
let's be honest though, Big Sur is not my favorite name either.
Yeah, but Apple is just messing around at this point. Like they made a joke in the press conference about like drug fueled trips to come up with names, and they specifically changed their naming scheme a little bit to throw people off. Even though it's not really that big of a naming scheme, it's just named after a place.
I would like to call it Mac OS
Big Fart.
No.
Yeah. That's
It's just named after a
uh-huh.
state park. Like it's not anything crazy.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
But
there's been enough jokes about it.
yeah. So the biggest thing that makes this for a user experience perspective at least, OS 11 versus 10 is that they have changed the UI a bit. So the biggest thing that stands out for most people is going to be the new icons. They have shifted to a more uniform shape like iOS. In fact, there was I think a lead designer at I think it was Square pointed out that the icons would look very good on an iPad because just like iOS icons, they have rounded corners that just so happen to perfectly fit the curve of the display of the iPad Pro.
Well, yeah, and the curve of the body too. The display and body kind of line up that
Yeah,
way.
but I'm just saying like it
So
fits
yeah, it's just like
the screen, which also indicates that maybe that's going to be what the next Mac screen does is have curved edges.
Maybe. Yeah, make a big 10-minute deal about that in their presentation.
I mean,
Look at
based
our
on this
curved edges.
presentation, I don't think they're going to. But we'll see. I mean,
maybe
it seems
so.
like Apple's changing a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
It's quite a bit of
Oh,
change here that we're
yeah.
seeing. Yeah.
So there's the new icons. They're changing some things with the sidebars. So right now in macOS, sidebars are a little inconsistent in visual design in that for some apps, specifically the older apps, the sidebar's height ends when you reach the like top bar panel. So the like let's look at Chrome for example on Windows. You have that top bar
Mhm.
there. Well, the sidebar, if you were to imagine having a sidebar within that, it doesn't go all the way to the top of the app, but rather just to the bottom of that upper bar. Whereas
Yeah.
what they're doing in Big Sur is they're changing that UI. They're flattening things out and adding specific like shadows and other design elements, but then they're also making it go all the way to the top consistently, just so that there's a consistent feel among the OS. Because some
Okay.
apps already
I
do
guess that
that.
makes
Some
sense.
apps
Yeah.
already go all the way to the
Yeah.
top, and that sidebar integrates with the window controls for opening and closing applications or resizing them.
Mhm.
And so it looks a little odd. They're refining that. Some of the more feature specific changes that they're adding. there's a new control center that is pretty similar to iOS's control center, although they're tweaking the UI to be a bit more optimized for keyboard and mouse. So for those that don't use iOS, if you open the control center, if you change the brightness or the volume, that's through a slider that's very much designed to be touched. So you just go like this. Whereas, normally on a computer, the slider that you might use is like a round icon over a bar. That's what it looks like on Mac OS, because that makes sense for a computer and a keyboard and mouse interface.
Yeah.
But what's also cool is that they're making it so that you can drag your favorite controls to the top menu bar. So if you want quick access to turn off Wi-Fi or turn off Bluetooth or whatever else you might want to do, you can open the control center and drag the icon up to the top bar of the macOS user interface, and then you have that quick toggle right there.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's just like a nice little way to kind of give yourself a little bit more quick access to controls.
I like that. I mean, small changes like that could be really beneficial sometimes.
Yeah, especially since it's something that's some level of user control, and so some people won't care. For some people, it's going to be really helpful though. And then for some people, it's like, oh, I might use it every once in a while.
Right.
And then the other thing is that they are changing Notification Center, and so they are kind of refining notifications a bit, and then they are integrating notifications and widgets into a single panel that you can open up over anything. And these widgets do also look very similar to
Control center.
No,
Yeah.
they look very similar to the iOS widgets that are coming.
Oh, I see what you were saying. Yeah.
And that makes sense because iOS and macOS are going to be getting a lot closer in software development the side of things, as we will talk about when we talk about the hardware.
Yeah, here in just a little
bit. There's a lot of other updates for macOS Big Sur, although in my opinion, a lot of them are, not a big deal. Like, I mean, we have stuff like iMessages improvements are coming to macOS because you use iMessage on it. Apple Maps' improvements are coming to it.
Of course they are. Yeah.
They're adding Memoji stickers, which makes me think that the next Mac is going to have Face ID. And then also the ability to do emojis, which if you use those, that's cool. If you don't, then you don't care.
That kind of stuff just like, blah, I don't know, bugs me.
Hey, they're adding face masks and emojis, so they're up with the time.
I hate.
Yeah, but you hate fun.
Every time I get one, I hate it.
But you hate fun. I'm gonna send you more emojis now. I hope you realize that.
Why did I say anything? This is a bad decision.
They are also changing how search works. They're improving search even further on Mac, which in my opinion, it was already a pretty good tool. But it's faster, and it now organizes results into a different group. So it'll have like a specific section for conversations, specific section for links, specific section for photos.
So it's becoming a little more similar in some ways to Windows search, where you can search between apps, the web.
I mean, you already could do that. It's just more so reorganizing how it looks.
Okay.
And then also,
because Windows search has been like a huge thing for me, but I don't use Mac.
Yeah.
Obviously, I do use iPad OS, but not Mac, so I didn't know.
Also, what's cool is that within the search window, let's say you click on a conversation.
Yeah.
You can, from what it opens up, launch into the actual iMessage, but by default, it just kind of like if you're searching a message, it'll show everything in a much like cleaner. It's I'll send you the link so you can show the B-roll, and then for people that are wondering what I'm talking about, they should look at the macOS Big Sur preview on Apple's website and look at the
if you're just listening to the audio version, check it out there.
And look at the messages section in the search that they mention. It's much better. But other than that, there's a lot of smaller updates. But the other big thing that I wanted to talk about was the changes coming to Safari. Now, a lot of this stuff is also coming to iOS and iPadOS 14, but I feel like they're more important. And there is more features coming to the Safari version. But so they're adding translation, which Chrome has and other browsers have. It's, not uncommon. But they're adding that in, which is just nice to have. They're adding in some new privacy reporting features and privacy tracking prevention features that are
They look kind of similar to Firefox's, honestly.
they're really cool. So by default, Safari has tracking prevention now for anything that's cross website, and they worked with DuckDuckGo on the like tracking prevention. And then in addition to that, you can very easily see which like sites had tried to track you and what was blocked. And you just have a lot more visuals and a lot more control over the privacy aspects of Safari now, which is very good.
Cool. Yeah.
And then they are doing some nice improvements with extensions for Safari, because Safari's been kind of shit with extensions.
It's been pretty bad.
So
that's actually something I'm aware of, even though I don't use it.
The most important thing is that they are adding tools for developers to very easily convert Chrome extensions to Safari. Thank you, because
okay, that's really nice. Yeah.
Nobody wants to make extensions for Safari because they just not enough people use it.
Yeah. It's a small market.
So being able to make an extension for Chrome and easily port it over is great. In addition to that, they like extensions on Chrome and extensions on Firefox have already had levels of control over what websites can access extensions. Safari's kind of making that much more front and center, which I think is a good thing. Again, this goes into Apple is doing some privacy stuff in a way that is designed to just get people aware of it.
Yeah.
And so rather than just asking for like permission for an app to or an extension to be used on a website or to be used in general, it's going to ask to be used on websites in certain cases, depending on the extension. And so that way you won't have, like, if an extension is gathering data, for example, it'll ask you more regularly. Like, it'll ask you if you go to a new site for the first time, if you want to use it, rather than always gathering data on everything you do.
That's good. That's good. And that some of that actually does line up with some of the work that Firefox does.
Yeah, it's not like new things out of nowhere. It's good things that needed to be done in Safari.
And some of it's things that need to be done in something like Chrome as well. I mean, Chrome's behind on a lot of that stuff.
Chrome is behind on a lot of things.
I hate Chrome.
And in addition to that, they're adding the ability to find extensions within the macOS App Store, which is good, because that's the other thing, is that right now there isn't a consistent unified place to find Safari extensions. It's been a little bit more of a pain in the ass, whereas like Chrome has their Chrome Web Store. Stuff like that.
And the Chrome Web Store works on any even non-Chrome browser, as long as it's Chromium based. You can go there and install stuff.
And then they're doing some password monitoring stuff. So while you should be using a dedicated password manager and not any of the ones that are built into your browser, they are, if you are utilizing Apple's password management system, they are integrating something so that if any of your passwords get breached, it'll notify you.
So Firefox.
Yes.
Firefox does the same thing as well. So that actually, I like seeing this though, because there are a huge amount of reasons that I use Firefox over literally everything else, and seeing that come to the default browser on something is nice.
Yes.
Seeing some of those features come to something that a normal user might actually come across.
Yeah, like the people that use Firefox generally use it either because they've just used it for years, or specifically because of a lot of this stuff. And
right, they're a power user of some sort, and are more knowledgeable about this kind of normal tech stuff, and Chrome is just so limited at this point, I feel like, in comparison to some of the stuff that you can do in Firefox or even now Safari.
And then the other stuff, so they're further improving battery life from what it already has been on Safari or on macOS, which from my understanding it was already one of the best browsers on macOS for obvious reasons as far as battery life goes. It's really easy for Apple to optimize that. But Apple is claiming now 3 hours more of video streaming battery life compared to Chrome or Firefox.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, so me, I would still use Firefox. It's the most cross-platform
Well,
browser,
and then on
but
top of that, Mac's
whew,
battery life is already good enough. Like 3 hours is fantastic, and if you need it, that's amazing.
mm-hmm.
But like it's
But
already
Macs
good enough
last
that you don't really need it for
pretty much
most
a whole
users.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, right.
and then
And that's gonna change too. That's gonna
yeah,
improve.
and then for general web browsing, which actually, for those that don't know, does often take up much more battery than video.
Yeah.
It's 1 hour more of browsing compared to Chrome or Firefox.
Okay.
So
Cool. That's good.
overall, it's just a battery improvement compared to where things have been, and it's now solidifying them as on Mac OS the best for battery life in specific.
Yeah.
Assuming that this holds up, which even the dev preview can't really count on. We have to wait until it launches.
Right. Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
and then the last thing with Safari, they are for the default start page that exists, making it more customizable, which is helpful.
That's
So,
useful, and I think a good addition. So yeah.
and that's really it for Mac OS. This is the more important thing that was announced, though. Apple
Yeah.
is Apple has announced that they are moving away from not just Intel for their Mac products, but from x86 altogether. They are moving to
Whew.
ARM architecture for their computing stack.
And this is a little insane. I mean, we expected it at some point, but this is, I mean, there is so much that this entails, and and to be honest, chances are the transition initially is going to be rough, but they were when PowerPC switched over to x86. It was
I
rough.
think it's going to be
Now that
better
was a while back,
than I
but
think it's going to be much better than that transition. I do think it's still going to be rough, but it's going to be
yeah,
much better
yeah,
than that transition. So, few things. For one, Apple's been through the transition before. They know what to
yeah.
have dealt with, and they know what to look for and target as far as making this easier.
This
Um,
is true. Yep.
so they're planning on finishing this transition from a hardware standpoint of just releasing hardware within 2 years. Obviously, it's going to take a lot longer than that for some apps to get updated.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you have to be careful too because they still have to have some level of support from the OS itself for things like Mac Pros. Who, if somebody just spent 30 grand on a Mac Pro, they can't
Well,
let that
and
die
even
off in
then,
two
it's not
years.
like Apple's going to stop supporting the current gen MacBook Pro in 2 years. That's not what Apple
Right,
does.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's much easier to run ARM applications on x86 than it is to run x86 applications on ARM. And
yes,
so it's
yes,
much
this is true.
easier for them to do their own translation um, without really needing much
Yeah.
effort, whereas translating x86 to ARM is a pretty big deal. However,
Oh, yeah, I can't remember what it is. I think it's like a 4x increase in necessary clock cycles to emulate or emulate x86 on ARM.
correct.
So
Now,
you waste like four times the
ARM
time.
also is generally more efficient than per clock
Yes.
cycle than x86, and so it's not like it's
Yeah,
taking
yeah,
like
that's one of
four
its big
times as long to run
advantages.
programs. It's just definitely nowhere near as efficient. However,
Yeah.
Apple is doing some pretty interesting things with the Rosetta 2 translation layer. So Rosetta is what they used before with the PowerPC to Intel transition, and
Yeah.
Rosetta 2 is new. Um, the biggest thing I think is that whenever possible, depending on the application, it actually does the translation at install time, not runtime. So it's not constantly running this translation. It just
Yeah.
installs and makes it work.
Yeah, that was just recompiling
Yeah,
it, which is understandable. That's a good approach because as we've seen, trying to emulate even x86 on ARM, um which so sorry, trying to emulate x86 stuff on ARM, we've seen with Microsoft to do that live has been a real
mhm,
hassle. It has not been great.
correct. Very correct. It's been a mess. Um,
Oh yeah.
the one thing though that I think kind of changes things that I just thought of and I haven't seen anybody else talk about in all of this. There's a lot better understanding of how to get high performance stuff running well on ARM. Now, obviously, the thing that I'm going to talk about is very specific to NVIDIA
Yeah.
hardware, but it's still ARM. The Nintendo Switch. It's an ARM-based chip that is running games that were all very much so designed for x86 hardware because PS4, Xbox One, and PC are all x86.
Yeah.
And they have been able to get very high performance games. Obviously, they have to downgrade the games a lot because it's not even a high-end ARM chip. But the fact that we are
Right.
seeing games like Witcher work at all on Switch,
It's really
it's
impressive.
really impressive. It shows that developers have learned, like I mean, not Mac OS developers necessarily, but the techniques are out there now to do this better than we've seen
Yeah.
before. And obviously, there hasn't been a push by Microsoft to really do this, especially since the Switch launch. We saw them release an ARM, ARM computers a while ago, but they just didn't really put much effort into it.
No, and they have since released another one, I believe, but they still don't seem to be doing a ton of work on
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And so I feel like we're gonna see a faster transition software wise to this than we did from PowerPC to Intel. And I think that
Yeah.
we're going to see developers be able to get more performance out of it faster. But let's talk about the hardware because that's what's interesting. So initially what we're seeing, the only hardware announcement that we have is the developer transition kit, which again, this is something they did previously. But in
Yeah.
this case, it's essentially a Mac Mini running the A12Z Bionic, which is the chip found in the iPad, though obviously it has less thermal constraints and less power constraints because it's in a different form factor that's designed for this. So it's going to run better. It's got 16 gigs of RAM, a 512 gig SSD. The rest of that stuff doesn't really matter as much as what processor's in it, I feel like.
Yeah. Agreed.
But this
And
is
that kind of stuff can
Yeah.
change too.
Well,
And
and this
yeah.
is
Yeah.
the A12Z is not going to be what we see in even the first Mac laptop running this. This is just to
Oh
get
yeah.
developers
Absolutely.
up to speed with getting their code working well on ARM that don't already
Yeah.
make stuff for iOS devices. Because the
Right.
goal that Apple has is universal apps. They want one code base. Obviously, you have to design the UIs differently for each product, but one like
Yeah.
core code base for Mac, iPad, and iPhone, and WatchOS and everything
And
else.
there's not just a user friendly aspect to that that's kind of blaringly obvious, but there's more that can play into that as well. So it's more data efficient
Yeah,
to have it that way, right? So Apple's data centers don't have to store as much if all of the apps are smaller aside from UI changes for each
yeah,
device,
and it's
right?
also easier
And that kind of
for
stuff.
developers. If you have to build, let's say you want to build a browser. If you have to build a browser that's optimized for ARM and then another browser that's optimized for x86, that's a lot of
Yeah.
work. If you can just build one browser that's optimized for ARM, that's much easier to put in more optimization for.
Yeah.
Apps will be
Yeah.
able to
And
better
more
take,
efficient coding.
you know, with smaller teams at least, you'll be able to better take advantage of the hardware by just focusing. And this is the console advantage, really, of focusing
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
one architecture. Now, obviously, there's multiple different power levels, but being able
Right,
to go
right, yeah.
all in on ARM is going to be helpful.
I think so
Um,
too, and I think it's a good move for really portable
yeah.
machines.
What
Um,
I'm
the desktop side is what I'm like.
Yeah, now I'm interested to see though what Apple can pull off with that because based on what they've shown with the imagery that they used, they're designing chips specifically for laptop and specifically for desktop. It does not look like what we're
Yeah,
going to get is A12Z across the stack, A13 across the stack, which
yeah,
is what they do
yeah,
for mobile is they have, their current A series chip is generally what we see across their entire mobile stack. But their
yeah.
mobile
Or
stack is
potentially a upclocked version of it on some of the
Yeah,
higher end
but like their
devices.
mobile
Yeah,
stack is generally all pretty similarly thermal constrained and power constrained because they're running mobile
yeah,
devices on smaller batteries, and even just on battery in general. Whereas when you look at what we might see from an iMac, we've never seen an ARM chip designed for desktop. We've seen ARM chips designed for data centers, and they can do some great things.
Oh
But
yeah, and they can clock pretty high too when they have the ability to do
yeah,
so.
and so we've
Yeah.
never seen someone go all out in designing an ARM chip for desktop, and I can't wait to see what that is, just because that'll give us a better idea of if ARM is long term. Maybe it is a viable option that we just have never gotten the chance to really try for desktop. We don't know.
Yeah.
And obviously, the translation stuff requires extra clock cycles, but maybe long term ARM could end up being a better architecture. Maybe it won't be. We have no idea because we've never really had
Well,
that comparison in
yeah.
that space.
Well, it also though, okay, so the bigger thing I see is that it's just it depends on the end goal of the product, and the end goal of a lot of Apple's products is user simplicity and single
Mhm.
ecosystem. And that is where you can have an advantage from having both the same instruction set across the stack, but also just having the you can optimize for that sort of thing. And so it's not even so much that ARM is necessarily, the better solution for desktop. It's that it's a different solution for desktop that makes more sense in an Apple-like ecosystem versus Linux or Windows, where the goal is to be compatible and be able to do as
Mhm.
many things as possible,
Yeah.
right? Like Windows as an OS can do more than any OS, period. And Linux guys will argue with that, but guess what? Linux on Windows, right? So
Yeah.
like, and sure, the subsystem, Windows subsystem for Linux is not as good as full Linux, but also you have virtual machines and stuff, of course. But the point is that Apple's goal is not make Mac do literally everything. It's make Mac do the things that most people would use it for really, really, really well, and make it so that people know that going into
Mhm.
it. You buy a Mac because or an iPad because you know what you want to do
Yeah.
with it.
But what I was trying to get at with the processor side is like, what if, I mean, obviously we don't know. And again, it could end up just not being better. But what if Apple ends up coming out with an ARM chip for iMac that is better than what we see running on, Windows
Well, you're
machines?
talking pure
Yeah,
performance,
because
right?
like
Yeah, yeah.
much weaker clock speed and everything chips on like iPad outperform the stuff we see in the lower end Macs.
This is true,
And
and you can even compare them to tablets from Windows and stuff that are running x86 chips.
yeah, and like we've
Yeah.
never seen really in a like we've never seen ARM Unleashed is what I'll say in a consumer hardware. And so
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
find out that ARM can, it doesn't have to be better. If it can be competitive with x86,
Yeah.
then what if Intel decides they don't want to pay AMD licensing anymore and they decide to go with ARM and make a socketable ARM chip? Because Intel has to
Mhm.
pay AMD for
Mhm.
licensing for 64-bit.
Yeah, no, that's true.
And so like there's no reason it
It's an
can't be
interesting thought.
socketable. And so it's just a matter of if the ARM, like the base architecture of ARM could theoretically be competitive with x86, then that if that
Mhm.
is the case, and we won't really know until we see someone go all out on ARM, then that could long term have some pretty crazy implications.
It could, from a pure performance standpoint, I agree. I do think that the compatibility and capability of x86, as well as Intel has consistently added instruction sets like AVX and stuff like that.
I mean, they can do
Um,
all that on
you
ARM
know,
though.
yes and no. I mean, ARM doesn't want to have too many instructions because then it starts to lose its entire benefit of efficiency, right? x86 has an insane amount of instruction
Mhm.
sets, and that's part of its ability. And so I think it just depends on what the goals are, and if they can, if Apple can get better performance for video editing out of ARM than you can out of x86 on any Windows machine,
That's gonna
then that
terrify some companies.
yeah, right. Like that is still like there will still be a place for x86, I think, for an extraordinarily long
Mhm.
time, but it's less x86 is less specialized and is less efficient. And so for like mobile, ARM all the way. And then for something that is more specific built, I do think it's probably going to be possible to pull more performance out of ARM either period or for less money than you can out of x86. And so I think Apple is actually going to see the ability to either profit more or potentially sell more performance for less money.
And then another thing too, that would be obviously it's not really a benefit that Apple's going to be able to sell people on, because it's only going to be a benefit at massive scale. But ARM is more power efficient for the performance it gets. That's been the case. Like, that's why it's got used in mobile over x86. And so with that being the case, if Apple can show that the hardware can be somewhat competitive with x86, again, it just needs to be competitive, and we can start to see more focus from Windows to make ARM work better, and maybe maybe Microsoft has to build their own version of Rosetta to get this type of thing up and running well. But if we can get the bulk of computers onto a more power efficient platform, then globally that helps reduce power consumption. And I mean, ARM chips are crazy. Like, iPad has, jack shit for power consumption, yet it outperforms or power power consumption. Yet it outperforms Intel chips that obviously consume quite a bit more power. In some cases double, triple. Because even the lower end Intel chips are, take what, 25 watts, sometimes 30 watts.
Well, they have ones that go down to 5.
Yeah, but those are like the U or the Y or whatever, those really shitty ones.
Oh yeah, they're
Whereas
really
I'm
slow.
talking like if you look at like the
Yeah.
Macs that run the i3s, if my iPad can be, can consume half the power for somewhat similar performance. Well, if long term, again, this is not something that would happen anytime soon, but in the context of climate change and switching over our energy systems, if long term we can get a bulk of like consumer computing over a much more power efficient platform, that helps ease that transition and ease how much we need in power. And as more and more people are using computers, and there are more people that are going to be using computers as developing countries grow, being able to introduce to them ARM and have them go straight into that would be a good way to help reduce global power consumption.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's already a thing that definitely is, reducing power consumption is good no matter what, right? Like, our global power consumption has been on a continual rise for a really long time. And we have to keep up with that one way or another. And potentially part of keeping up with that is not having to keep up with it by using less.
And if we can, like, obviously this is something that most people don't really care about the societal level changes, but like, if we can deal with a couple year, even if it's a 5-year annoyance transition, to have the next next 20, 30 years be on a much more efficient CPU architecture, that's going to have GDP advantages, it's going to have spending advantages, it's going to have job, like, so many different advantages as far as how we have to deal with global power levels.
Absolutely. And I think it's important. And you mentioned global warming, and I think that is a factor to play in there too. I think that we have to figure out how to efficiently produce power, because no matter what, our power usage is going to go up. But being able to ease that transition is incredibly important, and I think ARM does have the ability to help with that in a lot of ways. And we're seeing ARM more and more places in the data center and stuff like that.
And in some regards, actually, I think that the shift to mobile computing, like, Apple pushing the iPad to be people's next computer, is kind of another way to achieve that, in that if people can just get used to using an iPad, then they don't have to worry about the translation layer. They don't have to worry about apps. For certain use cases, you're always going to need that higher end stuff. And so it's good to still try and get that transitioned over. But there's going to be some of those benefits come from just getting people to use iPads and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I think so.
There are some downsides to the switch to ARM, though. For one, we don't really know how apps are going to work. Like, are you going to be able to just download apps from anywhere?
That's another good question.
I mean, I would assume initially yes. Like, obviously Big Sur's not going to limit you, because the translation layer exists, and that's for x86 apps, which you
Yeah.
don't get from the Mac App Store in most cases.
Yeah, that is a concern. Is, we have seen moves from Apple before, almost purely to make profit, in terms of, if they were like, oh well, you have to do it through the App Store
Yeah.
now because ARM, like, that's the, oh yeah, you have to give us a 30% cut,
Yeah.
and
And
we
the
yeah
kind of the main thing that makes me think that that's not going to be what ends up happening is this transition period. Because if we already have to have it so that, like, if they could go straight into Big Sur, the first OS that will launch for Macs for ARM, if they could
yeah
go straight into that with everybody having an ARM Mac, then they could do that very easily. They could just say,
yeah
this is where you get your apps now. But if you have 2 or 3 years of people getting apps from elsewhere, then people are going to get used to getting even potentially ARM apps from elsewhere.
yep, that's true.
So my hope
So
is
hopefully they
that,
stick with
yeah,
that.
my hope
Yeah,
is that the place you go to download universal apps is the Mac App Store, and that
yeah,
otherwise you can still download stuff as you do now. It
yeah,
just
yeah,
happens
because
to be
they do
coded
need
for
to be
ARM.
careful about pulling it away from semi-power
Yeah.
users,
And like,
because like yeah
Mac users are already used to downloading the specific Mac version. And so
yeah.
if it's Mac x86, Macs, or Mac ARM, it's not that much more difficult.
No, that's
So,
true. That's true too. And I mean, there's auto detection for that kind of stuff to help too.
yeah.
So yeah,
So, yeah, that's really it. That's a big change. It's just a big change that we'll have to wait and see the longer term ramifications of. Um, but that kind of really
yeah,
wraps up the Apple stuff.
yeah. No, that was. I mean, it's like 2.5 hours or 2 hours of Apple
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
but
and there's so many features. Like if you guys want to see everything, go to the Mac OS Big Sur preview page, scroll down, and there's an option to
yeah,
click learn more, and it lists a ton of features, and it's not all of them.
yeah. No, I mean, this software launch is
Yeah,
huge. Yeah,
Apple went
absolutely.
ham this year.
Alrighty, so now we're gonna jump into the other topics here for WordCast 76. We've got a few interesting points here. The first one is I'm still mad at Western Digital. So we talked about I think it was in the last podcast, or it might have been 2 podcasts ago, how Western Digital was not telling people and was using shingled magnetic recording in their NAS drives, their RED drives, which are for network attached storage systems, so for servers and stuff. And they were not letting people know that they were using shingled magnetic recording, which for those that don't know, shingled magnetic recording, SMR, in a hard drive allows you to store more data, but it also makes it so that if you have to modify that data later, it takes way longer to modify it. I won't get into the details of why that is and how that works, but that is the general concept, is to try and hold more data in the same hard drive size. And so it's a great technology for the right use case, but the issue is if you're not purpose built for it, it causes a lot of problems. So it can be okay for some desktop uses if you're using it as a storage drive, not an OS drive. Horrible as an OS drive, basically unusable. And you can use it in certain NAS and server and data center usages, in certain instances, and it's better for those uses of like long-term archival storage for quick retrieval, right? Because like you can store stuff on tape drives and those last a super long time and are really cheap, but they're really long recovery time, versus something like this where you can have essentially instant access to it, while still being able to store really long-term data. And so SMR is a great technology, but if you put it in something that is not purpose built for it, it can be so catastrophic it can lead to not just slowdowns but data loss. And this is something that can happen in like a NAS situation, where if you have a drive die and you replace it with an SMR drive, a shingled magnetic recording drive, your resilver or rebuild time of your storage array can be as long as a couple weeks potentially, depending on how large your data is. And that's really, really, really bad, versus potentially taking a few hours. And the reason that's bad is not just because obviously it takes a long time, something else could happen, but also a lot of times when you're building NASs and stuff, you buy all the drives at the same time. They're oftentimes manufactured like one after one after another. And so there is actually a statistically higher likelihood that drives that were manufactured in the exact same run fail in a similar amount of time. If there was a mistake that was happening on the production line at that time that wasn't caught until later, they'll all have that. And so it's not uncommon, actually, for if you do buy all the drives together, that they die within a couple of weeks of each other. And that is why some of the recommendations for people building NASs is to mix drives, buy different brands. Anyway, when you have that 12-day or 2-week rebuild time, potentially, you could have other drives die at the same time and you lose your data. Or you can just have the rebuilds completely error out. So it's really, really bad. And WD was not branding things correctly, so you didn't know they were SMR, and it was in their drive specifically built for NAS, which is where it is the most catastrophic if you don't purposely build for it. So then Western Digital decided that their fix for this was going to be not to just, oh yeah, I guess we shouldn't do that. We won't use single magnetic recording in our NAS drives anymore. It was to just add a new brand name for the ones that aren't single magnetic recording. So you now have, oh, it's so bad. So you now have WD Red, which can be SMR, and those are still considered NAS hard drives. The label still says NAS hard drive, but there's the WD Red Plus, and those are standardized magnetic recording. Now I can't remember what the C stands for, but CMR. And then you have WD Pro, which are the higher performance CMR drives. And I'm just so disappointed. This is literally not doing what people are asking you to do. And it just seems lazy almost to rebrand instead of fixing what you're doing with the branding in the first place. Whereas Seagate got yelled at for doing a similar thing, but Seagate did not put SMR in NAS specific drives. Their Iron Wolf drives and their Exos drives, which are their enterprise NAS drives, and enterprise in general actually, were not with SMR. They had CMR.
CMR stands for conventional magnetic recording.
Thank you. I couldn't remember. I knew it was something stupid. It's just frustrating to see Western Digital taking this method, because it's still going to confuse consumers that know the WD Red name. And it also would not surprise me for them to start putting things like the WD Reds that use SMR in some of the shuckable easy store drives and stuff like that, right? So it's also potentially going to be a way to try and stop people from buying the shuckable easy stores for their NASs, which kind of sucks for the NAS community. So disappointing there. I'm pretty mad about that.
Yeah, when I first saw this was their response, even I was just like, this is bullshit.
Yeah. You can't be like, oh, we fucked up our product line, so we're just going to add another product line, and that one's going to be what you want. But the one we fucked up still fucked up. It's so bad.
And by adding this by adding this additional naming scheme and everything, I feel like it's going to make it even easier for them to up the price later on.
I think so too. Yeah.
We'll see the base model Reds stay the same, and then go up a much smaller amount, and then the Plus models go up a little bit more, and they can kind of diverge the pricing even further.
Yeah. I think and that's something they've done before. I mean, they always like to push pricing up, and it's annoying. And they've been sued for this, by the way, as a reminder. And I don't know. I'm just frustrated because Seagate did take shit for this, but again, unless I'm remembering incorrectly, but I think I read in several places, their drives that were labeled for NAS usage were never SMR.
Correct.
And Seagate basically said we would never do that. Okay, I thought I remembered right. And so that's the issue here, is you just shouldn't label NAS drives SMR. You should have, ideally, you should have an SMR line. But if you're not going to do that, it should at least be your base level drives and not drives that say they're for NAS use to be SMR.
Yeah, so for Seagate, it was a few Barracuda drives, one Exos drive, and 2 archive drives.
That's right. There was the Exos drive. There was the Exos one. But I think, I'm trying to remember, I think the Exos one was labeled. I can't remember. I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I'm
now.
just looking at that were.
Some of the data.
So it was specifically 2 Barracuda drives that did not mention SMR, and then a 5 terabyte just desktop hard drive
that didn't mention it. Right. Okay. That's what I thought. So which is they should still mention it in the specs. I would prefer it to be its own line, which their archive drives were and still are. But it's better if you just do it in a use case where it's not going to destroy everything.
Yeah.
So, pretty mad about that, to be honest. But anyway, moving on. I'm sorry, that was a long rant, but that's frustrating.
Yeah,
it's so frustrating.
a crazy situation.
Yeah.
So the next couple topics are about Microsoft shutting some stuff down. First up, Microsoft has announced that they are permanently closing all of their retail stores. Now, the New York, London, Sydney, and Redmond locations will be converted from Microsoft stores to some kind of new Microsoft Experience Center, whatever that means. They don't sell products.
I thought that was the point of the store, but okay.
In reality, that was. So from what I was reading from some people that
Yeah.
posted online that worked for Microsoft stores, essentially the whole point was to just remain competitive with Apple in image, and it was actually seen as more of an advertising tool.
Oh, rather than selling products.
Now, apparently Microsoft had actually planned this shutdown for a while, but the plan was for it to be next year. And COVID accelerated that decision.
Yeah.
However, I don't know how this is going to work, but Microsoft is claiming that there will be no layoffs.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Unless they're saying no layoffs because they already laid everyone off.
No, I don't think that's the case. I think,
but like,
and obviously this is no
layoffs
for now. Yeah.
Is it like, what they're going to be no layoffs, but you can move into call center work? Is it going to be...
Not exactly. They're going to have people, like, they're trying to amp up their remote ability to work with customers. And so from what I heard is they're planning to do more, like, video chat capabilities and stuff like that for somebody that's potentially interested in a product. I don't think so much for, like, direct customer support, but essentially, like what it sounds like to me is they're kind of trying to be like, oh, why don't we just take the experience you could get there, obviously removing the physically being able to touch a product, but everything else, and try and push that online. So you can go to purchase a product, you can talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about through video, that's willing to talk and help things out, and or help with things. And I think that potentially could be a really good, at least, trial run. There's no guarantee it'll work and that those people won't get laid off later, but it's an interesting shot. And this as well as the next topic that we're about to talk about is interesting to me because Microsoft, I have touted the last couple of podcasts that I'm glad they don't cancel things that often. But
yeah, so let's just move into it. Microsoft is shutting down Mixer.
Yes. Now, I will say one of the points was that Microsoft doesn't close things down as quickly. And Mixer did push a long time and was basically doing nothing for a long time. I can't remember when they came out, but
2016.
Yeah, 2016. So, I mean, 4 years is a pretty good push for something that has literally just been a money sinkhole for them. They haven't made money off of it.
No, but a big part of, from my understanding, the point of Mixer was actually to integrate with xCloud. A lot of the benefits that were coming from Mixer would have been the same stuff that Google wants to do with Stadia that they had promised. In that, the idea with Stadia is like you could be playing a game and with one button easily stream, and then you can have it so that like you could be watching somebody streaming and then with one button start launching the game, and it's all very directly integrated. And it was going to be more so, from my understanding, at least the recent vision was that it was going to be more so a way to boost xCloud, and so the fact that it didn't even last until xCloud is kind of disappointing.
Yeah,
I would have gotten it if they would have tried that and those features didn't get utilized.
Yeah. Maybe they just realized how difficult that's going to be because Google's promised that and failed completely.
Yeah, but Google also promised a lot of things from Stadia and just didn't do it.
This is true, and I guess at the other point too is Microsoft has been one to try to conquer the complicated tasks, especially for cloud stuff. I mean, their Azure is pretty damn capable. So yeah, it's unfortunate. I actually liked Mixer as a platform in a lot of ways better than Twitch in terms of UI and stuff.
On top of that, I would much rather use a Microsoft streaming service than an Amazon one.
Agreed. Yeah. Like I think avoiding Amazon
Right
and
now,
avoiding
the
some of the
only streaming service options are Amazon, Facebook, and Google.
yeah, and it's just like come on, like out of the giants, I trust Microsoft and Apple the
Yeah.
most with both my data, with both not with not trying to be as monopolistic, and just generally treating employees and consumers better and trying to do good things instead of Amazon of how horribly can we treat everybody but still have them work for us.
Yeah. Like
Like
Apple, they take advantage of their market power within their circle, whereas Amazon tries
yeah.
to use their market power to take over every circle.
Yeah,
Amazon
right,
wants to
right,
be
exactly.
everything. Apple just
Yeah, they're like
Apple wants control over what they do, whereas Amazon wants
uh-huh.
control.
Yeah, no, Amazon's very like, oh, you see that market? We could totally go in there, undersell them, make no money for 5 years, and kill them off as a business, and then boom, we have
Yeah.
it. It's a like it's a
It's
disgusting
literally
business model.
like they at this point have the money and power that they could take over most any industry they want.
Yeah, they can just grab an industry and it's literally the tactic is literally just, oh, we'll just lose money on it for a while until they
Yeah.
die. And then we're good. And that, I mean, that's what they did with shopping. That's what they've done with a lot of book services. That's not so much what they're doing with AWS, but they are doing with other services. And AWS kicked
AWS is
off
kind
so
of
hard
funding
because
everything else.
right, exactly, exactly. And AWS kicked off so hard because it was a genuinely and still is genuinely an amazing product. AWS is actually fantastic. But it's also funding this disgusting
Yeah,
destruction
I
of
would
every other
love
business.
to see AWS be split off from Amazon.
Agreed.
Man, that
Yeah.
would shake up Amazon.
That would
Like,
shake them up so much. I mean, that was why they were able to be successful in the product
yeah,
industry.
like if Amazon actually had to compete as a store based on the merits as a store and the pricing that they could actually afford,
Yeah,
then like they'd have to really do some work. Now,
they
by
would.
the time anything
And
like that would ever happen, they'll also have already built out their own entire distribution chain, at which point they will still have a massive
yeah,
advantage.
yep.
And I don't think that that'll ever happen anyway. The most realistic um, antitrust situation that I see actually occurring, even though it's not necessarily the one that I think should be the only thing that we do, is this was most heavily pushed by Elizabeth Warren, but the idea of if you are a retailer or like a digital retailer, you also can't sell goods on that platform because
Mm-hmm.
no
Mm-hmm.
matter what, if you are selling goods on a platform, you can undercut in price because you won't like let's say most companies make 10% off their product. Well, if they make 10% off their product after your 30% cut, then you can sell your product for 30% less and still make that same profit.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and that's it's I don't know, they're scary. This behemoth that misbehaves, and they treat their employees so bad, and it's like it's just because they know people need
Yeah.
jobs.
Um
It's like it's horrible. Like you can go get a job for Amazon, and they'll pay you a livable wage, not a great one, but they'll pay you a
you just
livable
have to
wage.
pee in
They'll just
cups. Um
right, exactly,
so
yeah.
back to the Mixer stuff. So the way that this is all going to work, so it's shutting down July 22nd. There is a deal in place for existing Mixer partners to move over to Facebook Gaming if they want to. Apparently, they have to sign an
Okay,
NDA to get partnered with Facebook. I don't know why that is. Um,
fuck
and
Facebook.
then apparently, Facebook is offering a one-time $2,500 signing bonus for any Mixer partner. Now, most Mixer partners aren't making a ton, so that's actually a decent amount of money for them if they want to go that route. But a lot of them don't want to. Um,
Yeah.
and then what makes this really interesting is that Microsoft just spent a shit ton of money signing people. They signed
Yeah.
Ninja, they signed Shroud, and
You would think they would give it a little more time.
yeah. Now, a lot of people did not go over to continue watching them. Like Shroud and Ninja's communities tanked. However, from
Yeah.
everything I've heard, Ninja loved it. He loved having a smaller community. He doesn't want a large community. The only reason he wants a
Oh, I
large
see.
community is the money. If he could have the tens of millions of dollars Microsoft was offering him and a smaller community that's easier to interact with, that's
Yeah.
most streamers realistically I think would prefer that.
Yeah, no, having, like 500 or 1,000 viewers instead, or even 5,000
Yeah.
viewers instead of
Yeah,
100,000
because like when you
is
have
like that's so much
100,000, you
easier to
can't
manage.
interact with chat. It's hard.
You literally
It's
can't.
hard
Yeah,
at
yeah.
that scale to even interact with just people donating money to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas, like, when it's only a few hundred, you can very easily interact with chat directly. And if it's, only a few thousand, you can probably read most of chat,
Yeah,
maybe
and
not
at the very
directly.
least, easily interact with those donating.
Exactly. Yeah. And, until you get up to the, probably 20,000 range, you can interact with those donating.
Yeah, I
pretty
mean, it'll
well,
always
but
depend on the community. Some communities are going to be much
of
more
course,
heavily
yeah.
interactive, at which point more people makes it even worse.
Yes, makes it even harder, yeah.
But it's just wild. And apparently, Facebook offered large sums of money. I've seen anywhere from supposed, I don't know, I don't think this is true, but $1 million per viewer. To
Wow.
the more realistic number I've heard is that they've apparently offered Ninja double what he was getting offered from Microsoft, and Ninja said
Huh.
no.
Yeah, because I mean, it's a horrible platform.
And on top of that,
I mean,
maybe Ninja decides to, he of all people, like Ninja and Shroud could just like come together and be like, "Yo, let's make our own."
they could, yeah,
And now
absolutely.
they
I mean, they
have
have the
tens of
cash
millions of
flow.
dollars to fund whatever they want. Because
Yeah,
apparently,
yeah, that's true.
since they said no to the Facebook buyout with the way their contract was set up, Microsoft had to buy them out of their contract. And so Ninja
Okay.
ended up with an estimated 30 million. Shroud ended up with an estimated
Wow.
10 million
Wow.
for a
And
several month exclusivity deal, essentially.
yeah, I would love to see them come together and try and make something
Yeah, I don't
because,
know if that's going to
like,
happen. That's
honestly,
just
Twitch.
complete like hope from
Oh
me.
yeah, no, but I would love to see that because, like there's not any other real competitors to Twitch at that point. Then, and Twitch, it runs the same model a lot of ways as Amazon because it is Amazon of just make the most profit. It doesn't, the user doesn't
They
matter.
should partner with Floatplane.
That would be interesting. I don't know how hard it would be to set up live streaming on Floatplane, but if it was just two people, they could probably get it working.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's not going to
And
happen, but
then,
that'd be dope.
hey, Ninja, you watch our podcast, right?
Yeah, hey, you watch our podcast. So does Luke. You guys should just connect.
Yeah,
Oh, we
just
get
do
a
it.
cut.
What if one of them dies? Oh man.
That's not. Nah.
What I will say too is it's weird. I actually opened up Mixer just to see what was going on there. There's still a lot of people streaming on there right now.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that stream on Mixer did it because they liked Mixer.
Yeah. Well, no, I really like the layout and stuff. I do. Like, honestly, I don't think it seems to respond faster. I feel like it's easier on the eyes and cleaner. I feel like it's a little easier to understand. Chat seems to update quicker on it, although I haven't used it enough to say that's for sure. And the quality seems consistently better.
Yeah.
So I'm sad. I'm a little sad about it actually. Any streamer, I mean, I don't watch streamers that much, but streamers that I do watch, like if they streamed on Mixer, I'd want to watch them.
Yeah. Now, to go into this more, so in addition to the Facebook gaming deal for partners, apparently Microsoft is also looking at partnering with Facebook on xCloud and Game Pass and some other stuff. We don't really know what that means because yes, they could do the integration in the same way we had talked about. Maybe they were thinking about doing with xCloud.
Yeah.
However, after this got announced, a lot of people within the Xbox community got very concerned because right now Mixer is a part of the dashboard. And
yeah, and we don't want Facebook.
yeah, I mean, like I was planning on picking up the Series X, even though it's not going to be my main gaming platform.
Yeah.
But no fucking way I'm doing that if Facebook is directly integrated into the OS at such a deep level. And a lot of people that were planning on going Xbox exclusive were saying that. And Microsoft came out and said that that's apparently not happening, but like we don't know what they're going to do. Because as of now, the Xbox will just apparently not have live streaming, which puts them at a huge disadvantage over PlayStation.
Yeah, they might have to integrate Twitch.
Which is what PlayStation does, but I mean, like, it'd be
Yeah.
very weird for them to sign all these deals with Facebook and then use Twitch.
Not integrate Facebook. Yeah. I don't know, and the thing about Facebook is like if they could just, get their security in order, get their privacy in order, and actually innovate their app once in a while, I actually think it would be a great, like, I would like to use it. Like when I use
They would have to
Facebook,
do a
and
lot
I
more
don't
for
use
me
Facebook,
in order for me to set up an account again. Because it's not just security and privacy, it's also um, some of the
employee
company
treatment,
decisions,
yeah,
employee
yeah.
treatment, um,
So I
Zuckerberg in
agree, I
general.
agree. My point, yeah, my point was just that, like, I actually, like, back when I used it, I actually liked using it, and I didn't use it like a crazy amount. I did not fall into the Facebook hole of ruining my life by spending all my time on there. But I liked it as a platform, but I can't work with a company like that, and it'd be cool if they could get their stuff together to the point where I feel like I could. Instead my social media is MeWe and Twitter.
Yeah,
And MeWe is not growing at the rate it needs to be competitive.
yeah,
I mean, their business model luckily seems sustainable, actually, by the way. I mean, I know that's not related to Mixer,
yeah.
but their business, MeWe's, yeah, it seems
And
sustainable.
the timing on this was very interesting. Obviously, this deal had to have been worked on for quite a while, so it's not like this was just like a split decision. However, it's
Yeah.
possible the announcement was done to distract from some other news. Because the day before this got announced, in fact, like the afternoon before this got announced, there was a report that came out. So, a former employee of Mixer reported that this was a black employee, and he was the only black person on the team that he was working with, at least. And his
Yeah.
manager apparently made some pretty bad comments about how the manager was the like slave owner of the team. Um,
Oh,
and this
man.
was
I
not
hadn't
made
heard about that.
specifically to him, but it was made to the team. Um, However, in
Oh.
addition to that, the employee also said that former employee also said that the manager had passed up some suggestions that he had, but then also later on made those suggestions or approved those suggestions when they were made by white employees.
Mm,
And apparently told him that he was pretty much only hired because he was black. And so this employee, now that's already all of that's pretty bad, but this
yeah.
employee did, or former employee, did what he was supposed to do. He reported it to the next level management, and that next level manager apparently didn't tell HR about the slave comment. Like just
Oh,
didn't tell
man.
them at all. Like they were surprised when he then decided to talk to them because nothing had happened. Um, and then eventually he decided that he was going to leave anyway. But despite planning on leaving and going through that process, he spoke to legal, who looked at it, and apparently legal's response was that the manager that said those comments was uh, not in any trouble because she couldn't be racist because she hired a black person.
That's really
Yeah.
bad.
So it's not like
So,
one manager saying something horrible is really bad, but it's not like this was just a one-off thing. There is essentially systemic issues within that that section of Mixer that just seemingly
yeah.
dismissed this as not that big of a deal. Um,
Yeah.
and so like that came out, and then the next day this got announced, and so some people were theorizing that like obviously this has been in the works for a while, but that either they were like, oh, we've got to make this announcement now to bury that news because I mean you didn't hear about it, and it's something you probably would have if it
Mm-hmm.
was not for the fact that the next day everyone started talking about Mixer because of this. Um,
Yeah.
or that Microsoft wanted to get the announcement out right away because whatever deal they had with Facebook financially is based on Mixer's current value, and that value was going to tank.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't know for sure what the details are as to what.
Right. Like they could be
Yeah,
unrelated, but
the
it's
timing is
that, I
very
mean,
odd.
the timing is odd, and then regardless of all the other stuff, this is still a big problem.
Yes.
And that I hope that doesn't signify any kind of like the social aspects of Microsoft
Yeah,
internally.
from my
And I don't
understanding,
think it
Mixer was
does,
mostly
but
run kind of as its own division.
right. That was my understanding too. And I don't think that Microsoft has a diversity problem, but I don't know that. That's not something I've researched. Um,
Well, and separate from
but
diversity
like,
problem, there. I mean,
well,
there's a
and the
big
lack
difference
of being able to
between
report,
there's a big difference between
yeah,
diversity problem and like full blown
literally just
racist
letting.
comments being allowed.
Right, yeah. It's the being allowed part that is like, like those people should be fired immediately, and if depending on the extent they go to, reported to
Mhm.
authorities. I mean that's unacceptable.
Yeah, it was
Um,
just a wild situation, and then for this to get announced the next day, I'm like, what? Um,
yeah, that's a little
yeah. And
coincidental.
then the last couple things. So to speaking of Facebook, which we have talked about a little bit, for those that don't know, there's an advertiser boycott that's been pushed because of Facebook's lack of action on a lot of things. And it started out pretty small, and then um, REI got on board, and then North Face got on board, which was a pretty big deal. Patagonia got on
Yeah.
board. Levi Strauss got on board. And as of more recently, Verizon, North Face, Unilever, Coca Cola, Hershey are all just done with Facebook and Instagram. Some of these are going farther than that, and in fact, also just doing social media advertising boycotts, like Coca Cola.
Yeah.
Um, but
I have some thoughts about this. I mean, sorry, continue. Sorry, but I
yeah,
have some raging thoughts
it's
about it.
wild to see so many companies actually joining in this boycott against Facebook and Instagram. And
It is.
before some of the more recent announcements, I think before Hershey's and before Unilever, um, Facebook's market value had dropped like $56 billion or something like that,
It was like 7%.
enough to
Yeah.
directly affect Mark Zuckerberg's net worth by $7 billion.
Yeah, that's pretty insane. So there's a couple things I'll say here. Um, I'm glad it's happening because Facebook needs to restructure things really badly. But I also do not like the hypocrisy of Hershey's and Verizon, who treat people and customers and employees horribly,
Mhm.
coming in here and saying Facebook doesn't do a good job with stuff. It's almost like, look, if we tell Facebook they're bad, we can be bad and nobody will notice. And then there is, of course, the like reverse advertising, whereas some of these companies, I'm sure, have caught on of, oh, we can literally not pay Facebook
And
money
get
and
advertising.
use, yeah, exactly. And then, it's actually even funnier than that in my opinion, because it's like we cannot pay Facebook money and then use their platform to tell people we're not paying them
Mhm.
money as advertisement for how great we
Yeah.
are. So it's literally like, let's bury another company because they'll make us more money.
Yeah.
And that's just like,
Yeah, there are definitely some
it's
companies who I think
savage.
are doing this strictly for the issue. I mean, like Ben and Jerry's is obviously a very
Yes.
active company. Patagonia is a very active company.
North Face and REI are fairly active
REI
as
is very
well.
active.
Yeah.
North Face is pretty active. Um,
Yeah.
Levi Strauss is very active. In fact, speaking of which, I think it's Levi Strauss and Patagonia have separate from the bans or the boycotts,
Hmm.
have been pushing for a movement for companies to give employees time off to vote in areas where they can't vote by mail come this November. And they have
I
gotten,
see.
last I had checked, over 450 companies have signed on, including Walmart.
Yeah, that's a enormous deal
Yeah.
right there. I also wanted to add that I think Verizon was the one that said that they're only pausing the advertising for 30 days.
So the push was for the pause to be through July.
Okay.
It is a
Okay.
1 month advertising boycott. Now, some of the companies, I think REI and Patagonia, North Face, have said at least 1 month at a minimum, but
Okay.
whether or not they reinstate it is dependent on action by
Action.
Facebook. But even if
Okay.
Facebook acts right now, because of how Facebook has acted, they are essentially punishing them with 1 month of lost advertising revenue.
And I'm okay
Yeah.
with it. I think, Facebook will survive. No users need to be worried.
Yeah.
But Facebook needs work, and it needs a lot of it.
Hmm.
Like a lot of it.
Yeah. And for reference, for
So
those that
yeah.
don't know much about Unilever, because it's not like the name that you interact with as far as the brand, they own a lot. Uh,
Yes, they're big.
One example, they own Dove, they
Yeah,
own
that's a big one.
Lipton, they own Skippy, they own Hellman's, like they own a lot of stuff.
A lot of shit.
So this
Yeah,
is a pretty fucking big deal, one to hit,
it
because it's
is.
not one company, it's a ton of companies.
And one company, they start to set off more
Yeah.
companies. It's a chain
They
reaction.
own,
It wouldn't surprise me to have Facebook see like 20 or 30% of their advertisers
yeah,
gone.
they own Axe, they own Magnum.
Yeah.
So it's that one was pretty surprising.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. And I'm for it.
and it's one of
Um,
those things
you know,
where, I mean, like, yes, we're talking about it, but like, since it's the Unilever name and it's not like Dove coming out and saying that they're doing it, it does
yeah.
hurt Facebook more than it helps Unilever.
This is true. Yeah, yeah. Whereas for Verizon, like it could be just publicity,
Yeah.
which wouldn't surprise me. And I don't know. A thing here is like I'm really happy to see this because when the government doesn't take action to fix companies the size of Facebook that are treating people horribly and doing horrible things with our data and security and privacy, at that point, the only next real step, the two options are either companies taking action against them or the users. And we know the users aren't going to do anything.
Yeah.
So the real option is companies saying, all right, we're going to put you in your place because nobody else is. And, and as it gets worse, these companies in some ways could be threatened by Facebook being big enough and also threatened by if Facebook has another big, horrible problem, people might not trust the companies that are advertising.
Yeah. I mean,
there.
Facebook is essentially at this point as powerful as many governments around the world, which is
Oh
terrifying.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but one thing I was going to say though, it's a really weird situation where, like, it's essentially just it is actually consumers acting. It's just not consumers acting directly necessarily, because while
Yeah,
consumers can't get Facebook to cave to them, there are companies that will listen to consumers. And if you get enough of those
mm-hmm.
to do it, it then becomes the popular thing for companies to join in that movement. That's what we saw with this, where it was some companies doing this based on some initial pressure. And then more companies
Yeah,
joined on board, and more companies that we would expect to be pretty active joined on board. And eventually it became, why aren't you doing this? And it puts pressure on other
yeah,
companies that kind of do have to cave. And so
yeah,
it's even a consumer tactic now of, if you can't get one company to do what you need, get other companies to make them do it.
yeah. That's a good point, actually. Yeah, especially the chain reaction. Of being able to get a couple of small
Mhm.
companies, small in quotes, in comparison to like Verizon, to get started on it. The publicity of that gets other companies on
Yeah.
board. So
And
interesting.
then the last topic for the day is some changes to the Tesla Model S. So they announced that they were both dropping the price and increasing the range of their long range plus model, which is their lower priced model. So they dropped it down $5,000 to
Of
74,000.
the Model S
Yes,
specifically, right? Yeah.
$5,000 to the 74,999, while increasing the range from 737 miles to 402 miles.
373
Oh,
miles.
yes, sorry.
Yeah, which is impressive and great. I mean, obviously not a car I'm gonna be able to buy,
Yeah.
but it's
It's
still
nice to
it's still
see
cool to
that
see a price
it's
cut.
nice to see the battery tech getting better enough that it can improve in range, while the rest of the stuff is able to whether it's the battery tech or it's the rest of it, they're able to drop the price either way. Like, it's not often
Yeah,
you see a
yeah.
product get better for less money at the same time.
Well, and to top it off, it's not that often that you see a what's considered a fairly boutique product get a big price
Yeah.
cut, right? Like price cutting the Model 3 is even by like $2,000 say, is a much bigger deal to people buying Model 3s than cutting this by 5,000 is for people that are buying Model
Yeah.
S's. Right, so it's like they didn't actually have to do it. They could have just increased the range, and that would have made people
Mhm.
happy. or nothing, right? And just kept selling it and making the same amount of money they were. And those people that are wanting it, like I would be out there to say that they probably would lose, like say this didn't happen and they just left it the same, the amount of people buying Model S's would have been identical, basically.
Yeah, like nobody's gonna be like, oh, I was gonna get the Model 3, but now that this is only 75,000 instead of 80,000 and gets 40 more miles, I'm gonna buy this. 30 more
Exactly.
miles.
And then vice versa. Nobody's going to say, well, I wasn't going to buy a Model S, but now that it has an extra 30 miles of range, I'm going to buy it. Like, but it's this, and it goes along with the business model that we've seen from Tesla, where it's this continued improvement on top of the car. That's not here's our new model year, our 2020 Model S.
You're
here's a better
always
one.
buying the best model that they have ready and like could produce at the time. And that
Versus
includes
other
the
companies,
price, which is pretty crazy. It's like, oh, we can make it cheaper, so we did.
Yes. Where versus the other car companies are very much so, oh, we have a cool new feature, but that's going to be in next year's model.
Or, oh, we added a lot of good features last year. We'll wait a couple years before we make a big change.
Yeah, there's that too, right? Where we'll hold on to the features that we could change until our 2022 model.
Yeah.
Our 2021 model is going to be the same car with different trim. you know, so I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's great. Well, that concludes WordCast number 76. Our recording time is 3 hours and 45 minutes, but the podcast is probably only going to be 3 hours.
Yeah, we had like a half-hour break.
Yeah. We had like 2 of them. But long podcast here. We appreciate everybody that listens to the end, and we're going to be starting to do parts instead of clips to make it a little clearer. So if you want specific news that is in a podcast format, you can get like a 40-minute podcast,
or
basically.
In today's
episode,
topic. It's like an hour and 20 minutes.
For just iOS and iPad.
Yeah, like realistically, we could just make, like, if we had a good way to brand it, we could just make dedicated podcasts, like 3 of them a week from one episode we record.
Oh, it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's such a long podcast. We could totally do that. But I like having the conversation just all in one thing. I think it's nice. And, for people that have long commutes, the podcast might get them through their entire commute day. Cool. So, I think it's great. Well, give us feedback, everybody, and we'll see you all in the next one. And hopefully I will also have some video content out the same week this is being put up. That's the goal.
Yep. All right. Bye, everyone.